Good morning to everybody. Welcome to the last day of our September board meeting. We are almost there, but we still have some important things, a few important things to discuss and to do today. As I was saying yesterday, I hope that you have recovered some energy last night after this very intense and important board week. Because the topic on the table today, this morning, is really important. And again, like with other topics, we can't take the risk of missing important things because we are involved in other very important things. This topic requires the attention, not only the attention of the board, and the report has been distributed early enough for you to have read and seen and formed your ideas and etc. Not only it requires your attention, but it requires your involvement in whichever decisions or progress we will make in this direction. Just for a very brief recap, before I pass to China. First thing, of course, I want to thank the working group or the work stream. I never know the names. The work stream and the working group and the staff supporting the working group for the job done over the last months. This started, as you will recall, last year in December with a decision made by this board to advance on this topic, which is a strategic topic of our strategy and work plan 24-27. One of the two burning platforms that we have identified and which has received a very significant good reactions and attention from our stakeholders. Generally, I would say that there is a strong support for us to do work in this direction. The question is which work and which exact direction, since this is a very large, huge topic which covers very many things. I think I'm not wrong if I say that it is my conviction that very soon we will understand that this is a topic that will help us make everything that we are doing here consistent. At the end, if we want, everything is connected with firm culture and governance in a way or another. So the big difficulty here is to scope the project or the work, understand which are the most relevant priorities in this field, and make sure that whatever we are going to do fits into our mandate as an ethics standard board and fits into our vision and our mission in that condition as well. So this takes time, and I'd like to just to advance something because, as Chana will explain, this reacted and created and triggered so much attention that suddenly everybody wanted to speak with IESBA about the topic. Everywhere I went to speak about sustainability and tax, people or all regulators, firms, other stakeholders, we want to speak about firm culture and governance. This is creating a lot of curiosity on the one hand, but also I think true interest. And I could say, I'm not going to say names, but I could think about some stakeholders about who I would never say that they would be interested, and that not only they were interested, but they wanted to speak with China and with the task force and etc. So this takes time. And one thing, and even if this is a burning platform and we should avoid being burned in the platform, this needs strong, robust outreach, fact-finding, reflection before we were to decide, or we are to decide what to do with this topic. We are here in a difficult situation, which is, this is a burning platform. We need to move fast, but at the same time, as it is a burning platform, not to be burned, we need to make sure that we understand exactly where we are and what our mission is. So with this, I again ask the board for your best attention to the presentation that will follow, but above all, because it has been, it will be extremely important to come in and share your thoughts and your perspectives and your insights so that the working group will be well informed to proceed for the next phase. Chana, thank you very much for the work done, and I'll pass to you, please.
Thanks, Gabriela, and thank you, everyone. So we have saved the best for last. It's not about sustainability experts, it's about culture. So as the board is aware, this is a strategic project in the current strategy period, as Gabriela mentioned. So the other members of the working group are Rich Huskin, who is online, Rania and Hector, who's to my right. And then we are supported by Jeff Carla and from the staff and Richard as a consultant. So we have been working very hard over the last few months in uh, preparing the report and hope you all had a good read of the report. In the past board meetings and as per Gabriel's opening remarks, we all know the critical importance of this project. And our stakeholder outreach to date has confirmed that critical importance. And I think shortly, Carla will cover some of the stakeholders we have met, and you'll see when you look at the importance of those stakeholders. And there are a lot of different regions covered as well. So I think we have met people in all 5 continents in the last 6 months. Um, I also like to remind the board that this project from the beginning has been on the whole firm. It's in the TOR as well, and it's not limited to the audit practice. During the journey, we have met stakeholders from all the different categories, whether the PAOs, regulators, firms, global leaders, as well as national leaders, those charged with governance, standard setters, and over the last 6 weeks or so, we have met with independent non-executives of the UK who are operating in the UK environment, as well as one global INE as well. Um, Culture and governance are challenging topics. And on behalf of the working group, I would like to thank all the global stakeholders who have engaged with us, contributed their thoughts and insights, and in a very open and transparent manner. During the process, we have met also with 4 SAC members in their other capacities as part of this engagement process. Uh, as Gabriela says, this takes time. And we have gone on a journey. Uh, and I think latterly we have been getting quite good engagement with the stakeholders, and they sometimes search us out to provide their input because the subject matter is such that it will have a profound impact on the firms, and it's important to take this time to engage. Um, I would also like to remind the board that the TOR was only approved at the March meeting, and within 6 months we have got to this stage where we now have a draft report that will be sort of getting your thoughts, direction as we go through today. And the preliminary themes we covered at the June board meeting, in essence, have been confirmed in the Q3 stakeholder outreach as well. There's a small change that Carla will cover shortly, but other than that, the 8 themes have broadly been consistent. And as the board is aware, in May, when the chair visited Australia, we presented to the Parliamentary Joint Committee's inquiry into ethics and professional accountability. It has a long title, Structural Challenges in the Audit Assurance and Consulting Industry. And they were very interested in keeping abreast of the developments of the IESBA's firm culture and governance project. Now that the working group's report is public, they have expressed an interest in admitting the working group's draft report into evidence as they work towards issuing a final report in December. We have informed them that we will get back to them next week after the board's consideration of the project today, but noting that the draft report is a public document in any case. So we have a presentation that Jeff Carla and I'll walk you through on what we have done to date. If you want to go to the first slide, Carl. So, so that's the agenda. I'm not going to go through the agenda. It's pretty self-explanatory. I'll hand over to Carla to go through the first part of it.
Thank you, Chana. So before we get there, a quick recap at the what we discussed at the June meeting. We had gone through the key observation that we heard from stakeholders on various themes. And at that point in time, it was observations as the working group was still considering what we've heard and be able to link it some of the findings from academic report and research. And we table an academic report by Dr. Eva, as you remember, that is available on the website. And the main things that came up from that report was culture is the DNA of an organization, and you need to consciously and intentionally embed ethical culture within the organization to be able to promote ethical behavior amongst every individual in the firm. So it's not just an individual responsibility, it comes as a whole firm as well. We also heard from Mark, who spoke on the UK FRC audit firm governance code. Thank you, Mark, on that. We learned about the principles of the audit firm governance code being leadership, people, values, behavior, operations, and resilience, and a little bit on the independent non-executives and audit non-executives as well. We also received a presentation from Julie Gordon, who is the IWSB chair on the ISQM1 task force, and she shared with us the experience of implementing ISQM1 in her firm. So that's a brief recap of what we presented at the June meeting. And as Chana mentioned earlier, Q3 has been a very busy month for the working group. We had numerous activities in terms of outreach with various stakeholders. We're very pleased to have been able to speak to them in an open and transparent conversation in terms of their views of ethical culture and governance and framework. We spoke with the chair of the CAOB, Panos Promedies, and we also spoke to the chief accountant from GFSA. Thank you, Yohei, for making the introduction. We also reach out to a lot of PAOs such as ACCA, ICAW, and Accountancy Europe. And we also made sure that we reached out to IFA XMP Advisory Group. They are an important committee to us. We need to consider what having an ethical framework with the organization or firm look like when they belong to maybe a smaller firm that makes out one or two partners. So the discussion on scalability came out quite strongly. And in Q3, we were very fortunate to have FaceTime with global leadership within the firms, especially ones that hold position of the INEs and the ANEs roles. To quickly recap the themes, let me just bring you to the next slide, please. We heard, this is a key feedback that we heard from the stakeholders. They were very supportive of the themes that we presented in front of them. I won't go through in detail as we will be going through these themes again as we come to talk about the working group's point of views on these themes. But what really came out is that it is very important to have senior leadership set the tone for firm-wide culture, and that goes to ethical behavior as well. It is without a doubt the main theme that came out to all the discussions we've heard. And there was also a little bit of a chicken egg situation, whether it's governance framework that drives the tone at the senior leadership, or whether it's a senior leadership driving the governance framework. So that goes hand in hand. There's very clear discussion that you can't have one the other, and accountability mechanism is very important as well. They all spoke about aligning incentives and rewards with ethical behavior. So it's not so much as when you identify when issues goes wrong, you put in place mechanisms where you highlight the bad behavior, but also be able to encourage ethical behavior to be able to influence a positive outcome. And overall, we were very pleased that all the stakeholders were very supportive of the recommendations that the working group is putting forth. And you hear more about that when we take you through the rest of the presentation. Next slide, please. This is the key themes from when we had the presentation at June meeting. As Chana mentioned earlier, there's slight difference in terms of the picture we present in front of you. Previously, we had role of leadership, accountability, and governance framework in sort of two different buckets. And now we clearly define role of leadership as being one, key theme, and corporate governance, governance framework is a separate one. The other one is the slight change in terminology. Previously, we had a speak up culture. And now we've changed the terminology to culture of consultation and challenge. In speaking with the stakeholders, they mentioned that it is not a speak up culture where you highlight when something is wrong. It is about implementing a culture where staff feel engaged and empowered to be able to voice and consult and challenge decisions that are being made within the organization, within the process that's in place. So it's not a mechanism to catch when there's wrongdoing, but also to reinforce positive behavior within the organization or the firm, and encouraging employees to be able to speak up via the channels. So I'll pause here for a quick reaction from members.
Mark?
Thank you, Carl. Sorry. Yeah, Mark.
Thank you for this. So, you know, obviously, I'm a real supporter of this project. I think it's, you know, incredibly important to land this and to land it right. One of the key challenges, I think, is the fact that this very much sort of sits at a crossroads, because there's a link into quality management. There's a link into sort of broader governance. There's a very important role for ethics. But it's how we join those pieces together, because otherwise you end up with a sort of funny overlapping landscape. The other thing I think that we've learned from a UK perspective is this is really hard to track. And one of the things that we really need to think quite carefully about is that as we take forward these proposals, it's not only setting out a really strong framework that gives what we need from this project, and it focuses properly on culture and governance. But I think we'll also need to give some thought, not necessarily for within the code, but material of some sort, about how you measure how effectively this is working. Because, you know, a lot of the culture projects that we've done have been things that have run over 3 or 4 years. And therefore you need to be able to track as you go along to work out, you know, is this pushing you in the right direction? Is it having a positive impact? And I think that would be a really valuable conversation to have, because it's not just the framework, it's about how well does it work.
Thank you very much, Mark. I think that would apply, I'd say, to everything that we do. So very much agree that we need to understand the impact that we are making or not. Laurie, please.
Thank you, Gabriella. Can you go back to your chart, Carla? I think this is great, and I think you've done, I'm very supportive of the project. I think you've done a good job kind of laying out, you know, the key topics, and actually also finding the balance between things. One thing I wondered whether you thought about having accountability as a separate dot, because I think you're exactly right that we have to reward good behavior. It can't all be about the stick. It has to be about the carrot too. But the reality is, when you have firms, and we have many big firms around the world, you have to be able to demonstrate to people that there are consequences when there is bad behavior. And it really does actually make a difference when people understand that when senior people misbehave, there's a consequence. But to do that, you actually have to have operationalized the frameworks around how to apply accountability. It's actually quite detailed and not an easy thing. The second thing is, one of the big flaws, I think, in firms is often that a hurdle they have to get over is the willingness to have more senior people held accountable for things in a visible way. Now that's starting to happen, but I actually think it maybe is worth thinking about whether it earns a discrete role in the framework that you have, because even though I know it's not a positive topic, it doesn't come across as a positive. it definitely has a significant influence on firm culture. And I also think when you have firms involved in, the reality is when firms are involved in an issue that has gone bad and they're in an enforcement situations, one of the things that gets looked at very quickly is have people been dealt with properly as that issue went through the system? And if nothing was done, that's obviously not a good thing. So I'll leave it at that for you guys to consider whether you've incorporated that under rewards and recognition in that way. Yeah, I know, I thought about that when you were
No, no,
doing
I'll-
this. So anyway, just have a think about whether it deserves visibility on its own. Thank you.
Okay, I might react to some of the comments. So Mark, yes, I mean, as you know, we are considering quality management and governance and all of that. With ISQM1, there are a couple of issues because it only affects the audit practice. And then it's also about that the report that is issued is appropriate for its purpose. That is the objective of ISQM1, while I think our culture and governance is sort of more pervasive across the firm. But we'll take your comments on board, and I think we might be revisiting it a bit later in the presentation as well. To Laurie's point, actually accountability, we have accountability of leadership, we have included under the role of leadership. And maybe we could sort of reword it to deal with it, but it's also dealt with in rewards and in transparency. And as if you would recall, some of the comments that Jeremy Hershon made, that he said bad behavior is sometimes slipped under the carpet and not dealt with in a transparent manner. Also, the negative consequences are not big enough. So we have some of it under rewards and in transparency as well, but maybe we could take away, and the working group could consider whether the role of leadership is really the role and accountability of leadership.
So maybe just one small response to that, then we can move on. First of all, it should be accountability for everybody. It's not just leadership. So that's why I think putting it under leadership,
Right.
it's super important at the leadership level because it's the thing that people gripe about, that at a certain level, everybody's like, you can't touch people. And that's just obviously not a way to operate. But really in firms, if people understand right from the get-go that there are consequences, whether it's you refuse to take your training or and those are things like that are issues. Having an effective accountability framework that's operationalized and applied to everyone. And I was raising leadership because that's obviously the thing that's very much in the press. But if you really talk about operating a firm, you can't suddenly apply accountability when you hit a certain level. It has to be something that people understand from the day they arrive right through their tenure and career and life cycle at the firm. So, and I just also think that there's something about accountability. It may touch several areas, but in and of itself, it is
More powerful.
it's just a really, really important part of this life cycle that you've laid out here, in terms of driving culture. And I hate to say that. And again, I think you guys have the balance right because you're talking about rewards and that's equally important. I actually think that's something that firms haven't done a good job of, is rewarding the good side. So I think that's really good, but I think accountability, just have a think about it.
Yeah. Thanks, Laurie. Krista?
Yes, in fact, I was exactly on the same subject. I think it should be an accountable ecosystem because everything there should have an effect and should be measurable. But it, as you say, accountability is spread over. And in fact, when I read the report, I didn't even find it really. Meaning that the fact that speaking up persons or characters are not specially pushed. They are often, it's not only a question of rewards and recognition, but also of promotion, etc. They're not promoted with the same time pass, yeah, not even sometimes going through the last ceiling. So I think there is something about that should be dealt, and it was not even, well, maybe I'm wrong, but it was not appearing. There was something about reward and recognition. I didn't see about this sign that means that you welcome diversity in all aspects, including in characters, and you're stronger because you have strong bones leaders that go through also and contribute to the strongness of the culture, of the governance and the culture. So I think it's I don't know where you should find the accountability. I don't see it as it's as it is pervasive. It should be. Maybe it's, yeah. The ecosystem concept is not about description. It's about effectiveness. So maybe an accountable ecosystem would be a good way to deal with the accountability wherever it has to be done.
Yeah. No, thank you, Crystal. So we will take that comment on accountability away. On the rewards, I mean, we mean financial and non-financial rewards, and maybe if the report is not clear, we'll sort of clarify a bit further.
If you don't want to add a separate bullet, maybe you do something like accountability, rewards, and recognition.
Mm,
Maybe you build it in there, but it's really, if for me,
mm,
and I, having dealt with this for many years, it's probably one of the single most important topics.
yeah,
Because the messaging that goes along with that to people about who we are
mm,
and who we are not is one of the most critical things
Yeah.
that takes place as part of the cycle.
yeah, Jeff.
Thanks, Laura. I think the working group will definitely take the accountability point on board to make it more prominent. And if the the report's not clear about the rewards side in terms of measuring the importance of also measuring ethical performance, we will make it clear. Even if I think accountability, if it's not its own topic, it almost sits better with transparency. I think because it really those two elements really it's important to make sure that you can demonstrate that leaders are or are not doing what they're supposed to be doing from an ethical perspective. But I think that's a
Yeah.
good point. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Yes, I think that one of the challenges here is that even if we were very successfully able to identify these topics, it's very difficult to draw a line between some of them. They are all interconnected, which is good because it just reinforces the consistency of the approach. But when we start discussing these details, it's difficult to see where to put things and how to divide them. But I think it's a good suggestion that if you
Yes.
put them, because it is automatically more spread across the organization if you put it together with transparency. But I definitely agree that it should be there. And Laurie, thank you for raising it. Tomoyo, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the working group for the hard work here. I think culture of consultation challenge is a good phrasing of because when we say speak up culture, it seems like saying be brave to speak up, but more important is to make a more open and flat culture where people are receptive to hear negative comments or such kind of things like that. So maybe speak up may be a part of accountability. So I think the part that the Rory word has raised is very important. But if we can focus more on the people creating open culture, open environment and the people who are hearing be receptive, I think that's a good area that we need to focus. So I thought a culture of consultation and challenge is a good phrasing. And probably speak up is more now popular and it's really short and simple. So CCC, maybe it's a bit long, but I like this phrasing. Thank you.
Thank you, Tomoyo. Paul, I think
Thank you. Maybe just flowing from our session yesterday with AICPA. I don't know if I missed it, but just the context and position of the whole alternative practice structures and how that fits into this conversation. I really felt that there were some questions being raised, questions in our minds yesterday, about how we're really dealing with firm culture and governance in this. So just to understand how that's going to be potentially eventually built into how we're moving forward with this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think Tomo, you were agreeing with us, so we'll thank you for your comments. I don't think I need to respond to that one. Paul, can we park your comment because a bit later we'll be coming to a slide on the on that.
okay, thank you.
I agree with almost everything that has been said, so I won't repeat it. But I wanted to mention my appreciation for the outreach that has been done with jurisdictional diversity. I think that each jurisdiction has a different set of ecosystem that needs to be considered, and it will be important for us to consider how we set a global set of standards that will be available for implementation.
Thanks, Sadia.
Thank you, Sadia. Janine, please.
Thank you. Yes, I also like to start with giving my appreciation for all the work done. It's a good, very good paper, I think. Covers most of, very relevant topics, I should say, in the ecosystem that relates to how to drive a responsible culture, ethical culture, I mean, in the firms, which should actually underpin or is a sort of maybe a sort of governance framework for the whole code of ethics in the end, because and maybe this is a really important area that really could underpin also the compliance with the whole code, which I think is very important. I wanted to raise a few questions on the ecosystem. I always have the idea, and I read also in your paper that it's about, you're right, about balancing the commercial side of the business, the making money, revenues and margins versus the more ethical behavioral side. For me, I struggle a little bit with that balancing, because for me it should be part of the business. You cannot say, and you cannot manage ethics as alongside of the real business line. Same with quality. It should be in the service. It should be in everything that is being done. And that always, then for me, that has also to do with the strategy. Leadership, they think about their strategy. If quality is not embedded in there, or ethics, or ethics specifically, it's being lost, because they make their KPIs and they set all their processes, they develop them. But the strategy is also, I think, relevant to think about, and the implications that you can put so many things in place and in writing in terms of procedures, but in the end, it's the strategy that they agree, where they go for, what are their goals. And that is, that should, there already, you should see that it's more than only making money, so to say, but there are also other things that they need to take into consideration. And I also like to ask the learning environment that needs to be created. It was Carla, you were already touching, I think, upon that. For me, that has a real link to quality management. Why? Because I think in firms, when you learn also from mistakes. But in auditing, it's very difficult if you would make all the time mistakes, that you issue a wrong opinion or those things. We cannot have that. So that means that there needs to be a lot of good internal control environment, so that people can make mistakes, but not that these are actually in the end detected before it's too late, so that you're not in the damage control after the opinions are issued. So I was thinking maybe that this learning environment with a link to the importance of the whole quality management, quality control, is also a very important area for to get this other culture where the quality and ethics is a prerequisite for me for quality. But in the end, it's of course about that they do the right things. And so I wanted to ask whether you also have heard these kind of things or think about taking those kind of aspects also on board. Thank you.
Thanks, Janine. So in some of our outreach, particularly with the regulatory community, they have told us that the leader or the CEO, managing partner, whatever you call the title, that person is quite critical. And when the right person is in that role, then they can see that the quality is good, the firm is taking the right decisions. And so that's why we sort of had that role of leadership as a key plank in this. I agree with the quality aspect, and I mean, in the working group I have been talking about, we have audit quality indicators. Maybe it's time to have consulting quality indicators as well, because now if you look at how the firms are at the moment in the UK and Australia, over 70% of their revenue is coming from the consulting clients. So consulting clients you don't provide any audit services to them. So the audit is sort of dwindling stream of revenue. So we have the history of this coming out of the audit area, but actually now audit is quite small. In Australia, the big fours average to the audit clients, it's like 15% for audit services and another 5 or 6% for non-audit services. So it's like 79-80% is in the consulting area. So that's another challenge. With your learning environment, we have captured that in the education and training. And in that, we sort of talk about that there should be continuous education, and also because a couple of reasons. One reason is, as you know, there's high turnover in the firms. So like unless you sort of keep doing it, in 1 year, there might be quite a different group of people there. Another reason is that we now have, with the growth into other areas in the consulting area, there is non-accountants coming in as well. But the firm needs to comply with the code. So you need to educate those non-accountants to comply with the code as well. And some of the stakeholders have told us that it's challenging to get the non-accountants to think about conflicts of interest when, pitching for jobs. So that it's a bit of a challenge to get the non-accountants to comply with the code. So
these are very important topics, and also the accountability that was raised, and some other things. So I think that's really good that you do that, and for the whole firm, including the network. I also want to say that.
Yeah.
I think that's really in the public interest. There you can make the difference, because they're not only manage the audit firm. Leadership is not only managing that part, it's the overall leadership that has a big say in what's happening in the whole firm. So I fully agree with that. And also I think the accountability area is also very important. And there are examples, for instance, in my country, where there are even some kind of mechanisms in place, they call it clawbacks and so on, that the profession itself has, for the larger firms, has put in place, just also because the accountability issue is why it's not working so well. It has also to do with the legal structure. If you have a partner firm and it's about your colleague partner that needs to be sanctioned, that's different. It feels for them different than it's an employee of the firm. You know what I mean? So that's also, I think, why, well, I understand you don't want to go into which legal structure is the best legal structure. I agree. But the legal structure that is out there has quite some behavioral consequences, short-term focus for, if you think about a partner model, for instance, has often the short-term focus. Also for partners on the money, those kind of things.
Yeah.
And so there are numerous things that have an impact that drive certain behaviors from the legal structures or private equity, as we learned yesterday also again.
Yeah.
So how do you make that visually in this chart, this ecosystem chart? Because there is this under this legal structure has also
Yeah.
some impact on the behaviors.
So with regard to the legal structure, whether, they're operating through a partnership or a corporate, I think we have said in the report, we don't want to go there because there's a lot of jurisdictional reasons why they may be operating under partnership or a corporate. And if we go into the business model, I think we'll be here for another 20 years trying to figure it out. Because we think that, governance culture, it should be like agnostic of the business model. You should be able to develop a good culture if the principles are right, regardless of the model that you're operating under. So our thinking is not to touch the business model and take that as a given, because there'll be jurisdictional reasons and it will be hard to reconcile.
Yeah, I understand that also. Although you could look at what are the specific drivers of drivers of specific behavior, ethical behavior or unethical behavior maybe, and that the various structures that we see have, and then check whether your project covers those by the principles that you're thinking about. That was my what I meant to say.
Yeah, so just looking at some of the unique challenges, ethical challenges, perhaps some of the different models might. Sorry, just looking at some of the unique challenges that each business model might have, and we will certainly going forward take that into consideration.
I think that this is a good suggestion and a good direction. We definitely, I think we had discussed that. We definitely, at this point in time, don't want, and I think we can't go into the structure, legal structure, and say you have to move away into a different structure. This would be, I think, a too long shot for us, not only to understand if this was something that was really a game changer, but with all the difficulties in terms of different regimes, as Chana said. This said, of course, we understand that there can be some triggers for bad behavior arising from some structures. And I think that what Chana is suggesting and the group is that we identify them and address them in the ways possible, in the possible ways. And of course, the non-authoritative material or whatever we may be developing will be a good instrument to raise a few issues, identify a few concerns, but recognize also that they are not for the years, but to address. Chana, I don't know if you agree with, but I think this is the, but I mean, we are not neglecting and just saying we don't want to touch upon. It's not, let's put it aside, but recognizing that there's reasons for us to do this way. Okay. Thank you.
React to one thing that Janine said. So I just wanted to react to your first point on the tensions, what we refer to as the tensions between the profit making
objective and the public interest. And I think that Janine raises a very important point. Perhaps the message that we should be pushing is that there shouldn't be, I mean, if we want, ultimately, if we think about it, if we want the right culture, there shouldn't be a tension to be balanced, but rather there should be an alignment. And I guess that alignment could be achieved. I mean, I think the way I see it personally, the tension exists when you're in the short run, if you're focusing on the decisions to maximize the short run revenue or income or profit versus the public interest and ethical considerations. However, if the focus is on the long run sustainability of the profit stream, then the alignment is there. And perhaps that's one of the key issues that we should try to push forward. Yeah.
And I think it's what you are doing. It's to try to identify which are the instruments, because it doesn't go per se. It doesn't fall from the sky. That things happen that way.
Yeah.
So I think that we'll get there. I think, but I think that what the group is suggesting is that we think about instruments and ways of helping the firms aligning the ethics and the rest strategically. We have a few people waiting for some time, and one is David.
Thank you. One of the things as I've been listening to the conversation that struck me that I don't see in the ecosystem, but maybe it's implicit, is the value of being ethical. Because when you have ethics as a value, it permeates everything: strategy, operation, rewards, recognition, learning, development. So that's maybe, and to Laurie's point as well, even accountability, right? Because and I give you an example that is probably obvious to everyone, but think about companies that focus on customer as their value. It's amazing how their customer service can be outstanding because it's something that they live and breathe. So how does ethics become a core value that ultimately sits and permeates through the organization? Because a lot of the things we talk about would naturally manage themselves. That's just maybe one thing to think about, just a different perspective. The other thing that I would suggest as well is when it comes to education, training, however you want to look at that, or even kind of culture, there are two things that I see often. One is that the best cultures that create the kind of environment where these issues don't tend to crop up is one that's supportive and safe. And it sounds really silly, but it's really true. If people feel safe raising a concern, it's amazing how they do things very quickly. They don't wait until it's, a gremlin in the cupboard waiting to come out. So that's maybe something to think about. How do we promote that idea of workplace safety? That's one aspect. And then on the training side, I have to be honest, this is one of it's a little bit of a pet peeve, including in the profession, is we do a lot of learning and development, but we do it on really obvious things. We don't do enough learning and development on ethical issues that are not so obvious, that are subtle, that those are the ones that often catch people out because they're not thinking about it as they're going through. So, but we do a lot on obvious things like theft and, misappropriation of assets. And of course, they're all problematic issues, but they're obvious. It's the stuff around, for example, pressure. And if I think about what happened in some of the recent cases we've talked about, that pressure probably started out quite subtly. And then before you knew it, it grew at a level and now it's out of control. So I think that theme around how do we make the learning and development more practical, but also really teaching the subtle challenges that often land individuals in difficult situations.
I'll take Andy as well. Andy? Okay, so now.
Yeah, thank you. Yesterday, we talked about a lot about PE. During the discussion, I believe we noted that there are many forms. Most of them have two different forms of test, non-test. So I have seen a lot of difference in terms of awareness of quality or compliance or ethical behavior between a test and a test, non-test form. So sometimes test forms just emphasize quality or public interest. On the other hand, the non-test form put more focus on client satisfaction instead of quality or instead of public interest. So I believe during this process, I think we need to think about more about the what brain level of what awareness between test and test non-test forms. So not only focusing on audit quality or ethical behavior on test forms. Test. I think you'll do. Just comment.
Yeah,
Yes, thank you.
thanks, Sunam. So David, I understand what you're saying about pressure and the training, because it's easy to do technical standards updates and all of that, but actually underlying all of that, there are ethical consideration whether you're reporting or doing assurance. And I think our normal even the education system is sort of like when you take even the accounting degrees we have done, there seems to be a lot on the technical side, but very little on the ethical training side, which underpin everything. So we'll take your point on board and see how we can build it into learning and development. And also your point about the value proposition. I think we could probably look at it in the first one, the role of the profession, and see whether we can put something in there. Sunam, to your points, yes, I think what was shown to us troubled me as well, because it sort of seemed to be just sort of coming up with a mechanism to comply probably with the requirement that the majority in the audit practice needs to be licensed CPAs, but also them having a foot in the other camp. And I mean, it troubled me later on in the presentation when they said that the PE could have majority interest. I mean, if the PE has majority interest, then that sort of creates a big short-termism in the whole structure.
Yes, even without P,
Yeah,
okay? This is the
Yeah, yeah.
current situation,
yeah,
current issue
yeah.
we need to deal with.
yeah.
Yes.
So, I mean, I think Jeff will get to the PE one a bit later and the short-term strategy on that. But I mean, and that's why we are sort of saying we need to look at the loosely I'm saying consulting clients, because they are growing.
Yes.
And as you say, the client satisfaction is sometimes a bit more prominent than the public interest. But I mean, as we have seen in Australia, that can quickly bring down the brand, whatever happens in
Yes.
the consulting part of the business. Okay, tense all up. Andy?
Yeah, no, thanks. I just wanted to sign on and expand a little bit about what I heard from really Rania and David in terms of, at some point, the project looks like a potential of putting dampers on the profession to keep it inside the straight and narrow. But really, I think the value of the public accounting, of the professional accounting profession is the public trust and the integrity that we have. So it's not profession ecosystem, we need to put guardrails on you. It's really to lean into it and to say, and to pull people along, that it is in the commercial interest
Yeah.
of the profession, small practitioners or otherwise, to recognize and acknowledge that the public trust that we have is what creates the value for the commercial value for the members of our profession. And it's not a limiting factor. So even when professional accountants do consulting services, it's not, gosh, you got to pull the reins back. It's that you got to pull through, really pull up the integrity. And so I think as, I heard some of the comments and Ronnie, when you mentioned about alignment, that really resonated with me, that it's, I mean, the overall emphasis of the project is not, is really to pull the profession through with the value and the integrity and the quality services that we have. And it's really not in opposition,
No.
I think.
Yeah.
But I think it could easily get to look that way of, oh, look at these folks, they want to put limits on us. Because I think when one member of the profession drops the ball, I think we all get painted with that as well. But when members of the profession raise things up, et cetera, I think, raises us all up. So I just wanted to respond to some of those comments in terms of the overall picture. So thank you.
Thanks, Andy.
Thank you, Andy. And if I may, I was going to make some comments in that direction at the end, but I think it's appropriate that I come in now because, Andy, I think that you're absolutely right, and that the purpose of this project is definitely to try to identify the best possible instruments, approaches, practices, etc., that a firm should have to be a highly ethical firm, which is in the interest of the firms and in the public interest. So I think that this is absolute, and I think that the report makes it quite clear that this is objective, that this is and must be kept as a constructive and positive project to disclose or to offer the right instruments. It's not very different from what in very specific areas has happened over the last 20 years with the governance principles and codes and etc., which are not to limit the self-determination and the business of companies, but to make them better. And I think that, at the start, 30 years ago, it created some reaction. Why do we have to have this and that? This is limiting our profit and limiting our ability. And nobody today at the biggest firms biggest companies imagines a company without these instruments, because it's obvious that they help the companies working better and having more profit. So this is clearly something that I think we are all aligned here, and it's not the opposite.
It's very interesting discussion. So, my point is somewhat related to what you said, Gabriela, and Andy's point. So just wanted to be very clear on the scope of this project. I read somewhere that this work, the provisions that we'll develop, would apply to all lines of business of the firm, right? So the level of public interest involved is not the same as it is in accounting profession or the audit profession as it is in consulting profession, right? Consulting may not always have the same level of public interest involved. So question is, are we clear that this is meant for all streams of activities within a firm? B, if so, are we proposing to follow a differentiated approach for one section, and and where the public interest is high, you'll have a different approach?
So we are sort of loosely saying consulting, but actually some of the other lines also could have public interest, like tax services, insolvency. So, and then when I think of valuations, the independent experts reports that are attached to share transactions. So although we are sort of loosely saying consulting, it is anything other than audit that we are calling consulting. And I mean, I think people go to the firms because they have some trust in the brand, even for other services. So once that trust in the brand is diminished, then there's an impact on the market anyway. Yeah.
So I perfectly take your point, especially the areas like valuation, which just does not affect the company which is seeking valuation, but also all the shareholders and the investors in the market. Similarly, taxation. But there could be, situations where like a client goes to the firm just for pure strategic advisory, M&A kind of consulting. And beyond the shareholders of that company, very little public interest would be there or to start with. So what I would suggest, I'm not saying that you should narrow the scope. Perhaps we need to build a very solid rationale for in the report, a perfect justification as to why we are suggesting what we're suggesting in terms of enhancing the governance, disclosures, conduct, conflicts of interest, those kind of issues.
Yeah, we can take that on board and work on it. and-
Otherwise, there could be opposition
Yeah.
on the simple premise that, look, where is the public interest here?
Mm.
Why should we follow what you're suggesting?
I mean, the code is applied to the whole firm
Yes.
as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I think we need to preempt that opposition, potential opposition that may come going forward.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Mr.
Can I comment on that as
Yeah,
a
yeah.
working group member? Yeah, Amarjeet, it wasn't opposition to our project, but when we talked to a lot of stakeholders, they tended to want to focus, unfortunately, first on audit quality, which is this is not focused on that specifically. And secondly, they didn't necessarily recognize what I think Chana was starting to explain, that we already have kind of come at this from a position of strength in the code. The code applies to anybody who works in a professional accounting firm and we do think we need to enhance that. And your point is good to bring that to the forefront. I would agree with that. But one of the interesting things I found from stakeholders, and while we've tended to look at people tend to think about the things that high profile in media have focused on, but things we heard from the stakeholders, many of those concerns emanated from the non-attest practices in the professional services firms. And that's why I think we're not talking about service delivery quality or only ethics in your service delivery. We're talking about ethical behavior across the board. And as somebody said, that's part of the value of the profession. And it doesn't, nobody runs around and says, well, the person who did something bad in firm X wasn't a PA, so it's kind of not as bad. That's not how it comes out. And so I like your suggestion that we emphasize that this applies to everybody at the front end. And I think it is very consistent with where the code's at. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. Laurie?
Yeah, I completely agree with that point, and I think it's a great point to raise, Amanjeet, because I think sometimes you hear from people in the consulting side of businesses say, but we're not a regulated entity. Oh, so you don't have to have ethics because you're not regulated. I mean, that is not the type of argument you want to hear a professional saying. So I think it is really important. The second thing is, to the extent that there's a multidisciplinary model going on, you can't hive off and say, okay, this part of our business can be ethical and this part can be cowboys and Indians, right? Like whatever's going on, like that can't be happening. The bleed over on behavior, it will make it impossible to run a firm differently depending on somehow there's a more elegant way to say that, obviously, but I think it is really important that firms who choose to operate like this have to operate under the umbrella of a professional ethics code and culture that is appropriate to support that. And lastly, I would say there are lots of, and people mentioned a few, but lots of business services on the consulting side that, and I always, when I was thinking about risk, I always think about where people are relying on your work. Obviously, there's a heightened public interest, whether that's valuation or forensic work, or there's a huge list, much larger than people realize when you dig into it, where, people in the public, clients, but more than clients, are relying on the output of that work. And so the public interest is there. I just don't know that it's been articulated in a very clear way. So I think it is there, and I think that argument can be built to be responsive to those things you'll hear from people.
Yeah. I mean, we did, I think there's a paragraph in the report which talks about some of the other services that might have that sort of same level of interest and then. Yeah. So we do have a paragraph on it where we cover some of those services, but we can maybe make it a bit more expansive. Yeah.
Just to kind of respond to what Rich and Laurie said. So I'm just sharing this experience, out of where I work, and I'm aware that that's a situation in many other jurisdictions. So today there's a huge pushback to regulators in the name of ease of doing business. Even in this country where we are having this meeting, there's a huge pushback, that regulators are counterproductive and, they are anti-growth and so on. So, so I'm saying that we have to be very mindful of the context that today the economic environment across various geographies. So, and just preempt the points. Yeah.
Mark.
Mark doesn't like my comment.
No. I think it's a really important lens that we look through at the moment. Equally, one of the things that all of our work is focused on is underpinning justifiable confidence and trust in the work of auditors and accountants, and therefore, particularly when you look at it from the situation that Channa explained, where, audit is a minority sport for many of the large firms. There's a huge focus on audit quality and delivering audit quality. There's a real contagion risk that something goes wrong in another part of the forest, and that undermines that trust and confidence that you've built up. And like, you're absolutely right in a sense of pushback on the regulators, but everyone operating in a regulated sector sort of knows you're only as good as your last fail, and therefore anything that we can do that improves the culture and the governance around that business model has to be a really positive step. And it's a hard one to do because the focus is, quite rightly, a lot of what we do, it's going after people because you breached a requirement, you didn't meet a standard. So it's all one way. And actually we're trying to say, have we got the right things in place to recognize and encourage people for doing better or doing more, or, and that's the thing. It's like sort of trying to make the engine operate in reverse.
Fully agree, Mark. Laurie, please. Can I pass to Laurie? Then
Yeah, and it's very interesting when you talk about the other part of the forest. I was sitting here thinking about, like broadly all the things you could be involved in. Sorry not to bang on about this, but I was thinking about the Purdue Pharma case, which was a consulting strategic advisory role that a major consulting firm, you don't need to use names here, but played in terms of advising some very bad actors doing very, very bad things, knowing. And it was strategy work, right? And the results are crazy. Or 1MD and all of the strategic consulting and advisory and finance type work that was done supporting that situation. Those were not audit cases, but they were massive, massive cases with massive public interest impact. So it is possible in that space to have that. And this is to Amanjeet's point, that I think we just figure out how to articulate that, because if people are still saying that, there's 100 examples of places where those types of things have gone wrong and caused a lot of pain to both the public, but also to the firms involved and people involved, et cetera. So I think it's just really, really important. And it doesn't matter whether a business is regulated or not. When I hear an argument that we're not regulated, therefore we don't need to do this stuff, I mean, saying you don't need to behave ethically unless someone regulates it into you is a terrible argument. It's a terrible brand argument. It's a terrible commercial argument. It's a terrible way to run your business. So I always shut those discussions down very quickly on that, because it's just not persuasive. I know you
Yeah.
wouldn't fall for that.
Yeah, no. I mean, you might say it's a strategy work and the examples you gave, Laurie, but invariably, these organizations sell something to the public. And if the public is impacted, then there is some public interest in it. So, Ken?
Thank you. Great discussion all around. I suppose I had 2 points. One is more connected to what David mentioned earlier, which is really a bit of a focus on the education and training element here on the theme of education and training. And I just wondered, and maybe that would merit some further elaboration as you further refine the report. But it's when it comes to education, it's not so much hearing the same things being taught time and time again, but it's whether the understanding is being transmitted, right? And therefore, to my mind, it's not so much the what that's being taught, but also it's how that is being taught to enable people in the firms to really understand what we mean when we speak about values, when we speak about behavior, and when we speak about the issue of culture. So that understanding, to my mind, needs to really be emphasized when we think about education and training. And it doesn't have to be on the slide, but I think it would behoove the board to really put a bit of emphasis on this. And maybe my broader point is really as I look at this slide, and it seems that what we're trying to do here is essentially to draw out the perimeter of what we're looking at here, which is really what we are talking about in thinking about what an ethical firm is about. In other words, so the term ecosystem doesn't say anything to me. When you have ecosystem and that's kind of surrounding everything that we have on this slide, because ecosystem can convey a message that it's about things that are outside the firm that are influencing what's happening in the firm, whereas what we're talking about here is really about issues or matters or topics that are within the firm. And therefore, I just wonder whether the label that we have is a description of what an ethical firm is, or at least the dimensions of an ethical firm. And I think it's, having the right label is important, because essentially that then focuses all our conversations within the board with stakeholders, and as we're writing up the report, this is what we're looking at. These are the different attributes, dimensions. As I say, we can come up with the right words, but as I say, ecosystem doesn't, it's too bland and it's too generic.
So just to respond to your comment, and so these are the key themes from the outreach activity. We have a slide later on what ethical firm should look like. So we'll come to that a bit later.
Yeah, but I think what Ken is trying to say, these elements are not the ecosystem. These are,
No,
the
the
idea.
ecosystem,
Yeah.
ecosystem is the round
Yeah.
one.
So, what this slide is trying to reflect is that these are elements within the firm, but they are influenced by our ecosystem, which we plan also to discuss in further slides. But that's not the ecosystem. So they are impacted, of course, by the ecosystem, like your governance, the accountability, all of it is affected by different components of your ecosystem, such as regulation, so on and so forth.
Yeah, when we talked about,
Sorry, Rich.
Yeah, when we talked with the stakeholders, and this was agreed by many, the ecosystem, we're talking about the companies and management, the boards of directors and audit committees, the regulators, and even bodies that set legislation are all part of an ecosystem. And I think we didn't intend this slide to project that ecosystem was wrapping up the things on below, but rather something that, as Rania well said, has an overarching influence.
So I think we need to.
Thank you. Can I just very quickly, China, because otherwise at the end it would be too much, because I have one or two topics that I'd like
Okay.
still to highlight here. One is also David's comment, which I think these are very good comments from Ken, but I'll go even beyond. I think this is an absolutely critical point, the way ethics is, people are trained on ethics and educated. And training and education are two different things. And I remember hearing of a conversation and a few things that Jeff also attended with someone. I'm not going to say the name, but about who told us something from experience, which is absolutely critical. People not only have to know that there is ethics, they have to be ethical, there are standards, the standards apply this way, and the values, but they have to be able to identify ethical issues. And this is probably the most difficult thing to teach, because people get into an organization, a system, and say, this is okay, this is the way it operates. Then if I see someone stealing or doing fraud and etc., okay, but it's this ability to identify signs of unethical behavior is very difficult, because there are very insidious way of driving people to take ethical behaviors. Speaking about, for instance, pressure and intimidation, the way this can be done, the very many ways this can be done, how you can stop people by direct intimidation, indirect intimidation, removing the resources for people to do what they need to do, creating, all these kinds of pressure and intimidation are just an example of people should be aware, and we have to create the ethical muscle of the younger ones, so that one day when they face such a situation, they are not only able to act, but before acting, identifying that they are in a risk of taking an unethical direction. This brings me to another topic, and I know it was the first one that we discussed here about consultation and challenge. I challenged the staff about this, because I was not understanding very well what this consultation environment was. I still have some doubts, but it's okay. The board is fine, and I'm fine. But I still think that even if we don't use the expression "speak up," we need to make sure that somewhere here we would suggest or recommend that the firms has a mechanism, like Laurie said, for early identification and addressing issues that may be identified in a firm, which sometimes lacks, because people can be can challenge, can consult, but if they identify something that needs to be addressed, they may be stopped because they are not the right instruments or the right culture. And the other, and probably last topic for today, and I don't resist to Amajit's point that regulators are being pushed back. Yes, they are. That's their nature. I don't see nothing new there. I was a regulator myself. I always try to put that hat off, and I think I'm successful. But I have a memory and an experience, and I know exactly what it means. If someone goes to the regulatory space thinking that they will make friends, or with the objective of make friends, forget it. But still, it is possible. And I don't resist sharing my experience, because having been a regulator for quite a time in capital markets, but also in audit, I didn't feel that pushback. There is a tension, and that tension is constructive, is good. We are not one and the same. We are not sitting in the same space. Our objectives are different, but still, what I saw was a different thing. Was a respectful relationships, and the mostly on the capital market side, regulated entities understanding to a certain point that they need the regulators. There were some interesting experiences, like we say, we want to make our lives easy, so we are not going to authorize anymore this and that. You are responsible, do whatever you want. The rules are clear. If you fail, we will be there. And the reaction is, no. We want you to see before, because we don't want to take that risk. And this is just an example of how, if this is well done, standard setting, regulation, etc. And this takes me to that point of Andy. This will help firms be better. And that's the objective, because nobody is here. We are not regulators. We are not public authorities. We are not here to to sue or to pressure firms. We are here to develop something which makes everyone be better. And I'll stop here. I'll have other comments later. Chana, please, back to you. And thank you for this very first part of discussion.
I think, Mark, you should be fine for your flight. So, okay, it's not moving. So these are, this is a slide on the public interest issues. I think we have, in a way, touched on these, you know, how unethical behavior can have a impact on the firm's reputation. And I think from what we have seen, it's sort of, you can see there's a link to the leadership and governance framework of those organizations. I think I covered the growth in the non-audit service offerings and how that sort of impacts, I mean, as Laurie said, just because you're in a non-regulated space doesn't mean normal, proper conduct doesn't apply to you. And also the impact on public services, because you know, depending on the country, sometimes government has scaled back on the public service, and then they supplement it by getting consulting firms to come in with its accounting, or the other ones like BCG, Accenture, so on. And so, but when like the examples you use, Laurie, that the recommendations of a report is implemented and it gives bad outcomes to the public, then that's where the public interest comes in. So any sort of other public interest issues? Yes, Andy.
Yeah, no, thanks. I think the first discussion we had was terrific. And along those lines of what we just said, when I look at this slide in terms of having everyone come on board with us to pull up the profession and be aligned with a value proposition of having a robust ethical performance. The first bullet point says unethical behavior impacts public trust. The last one is enhancing culture governance to mitigate risk of unethical behavior. And so right in the middle, we have this bold growth in non-audit services. It doesn't have like the tie that we're talking about, such as something like growth in non-audit services aligned with ethical, strong ethical framework. It almost sounds like the implication is that it's bad.
Yeah.
And I think the point is it's not bad. It just it's part of this issue. And I think we'll have more people come on board if we don't imply in something like this that it's bad.
Okay.
So if there, my proposal is aligned with ethical behavior, but something along those lines to have some words in there that will be directionally consistent.
Yeah. Thanks, Andy. Yeah.
Maybe on putting the fact that to some extent protecting the value, the public
Proposition.
trust, etc., through ethical growth or ethics in other activities. Maybe this would be more so there is a unethical behavior has impact on public trust. Mastering and protecting and saving this while having growth in other activities is important for the sustainability of the trust. Then and you see what I mean? So I agree with that there should be something expressed differently in this element in the middle.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Crystal. Sadia?
So I have a similar comment, and it's just that these seem very negative while we want to move to probably a value proposition. So in the paper, it doesn't sound negative, just the slide captures it.
It's
And
just a
it kind of
slide,
pulls
yeah.
it. I also wondered about the ordering, about whether you want to bring the third one up and leave the non-audit services for last. Because growth in non-audit services shouldn't be viewed as a bad thing. We just need to manage the ethical threats that come with it.
Yes. it's sometimes a challenge to put everything into the slides. Hopefully the report is a balanced one. Yeah. Mark?
So it's a bit sort of aligned to what Sadia said about the, being a positive driver, not a negative driver. So a really good example that I think fits in this space really well and is really subtle is I heard of this fabulous example because of cost of living pressures and because people struggled. I heard of an example where a firm provided its younger people with access to debt counsellors, sort of don't get yourself in trouble before you start. And it was somewhere where they could go for advice at a difficult time. And of course, if you've got that advice and you've got that support, you may come into work not feeling under pressure, not sort of being open to threats. And that was a sort of, really good example of dealing with the human factor in this and intervening to avoid a problem rather than trying to fix it when it happened. And I do think there's an element of proactivity in this. It is trying to sort of do that horizon scanning and say, it's not what's the problem we're trying to fix. It's what are we doing to avoid the problem in the first place? And I think that's a really strong message in the sort of culture and governance space.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I mean, when we come to the latter part, I mean, effectively, we have noticed some things in the environment and trying to take proactive action to develop what good looks like. Okay. Over to Jeff.
Yes, some of these elements we've already had some discussion. Yep. The board already gave some very valuable input in some of these elements and topics already. But we'll just still walk through some of it. Perhaps I'll pick out some key points that perhaps are highlighted in the report and also highlighting some of the key thinking that the working group might want to bring the board's attention to. This diagram, it's not supposed to give you the relationship between those different topics, but just trying to house all the key points together. And in the report, of course, we looked at the importance of culture, which is really the main purpose of this work stream. And some of those key factors that the working group has identified through its research and various outreaches in two big buckets, I guess, in leadership and then in governance framework, which is in a broadest sense. The report then also looked at the role of the IESBA code, what is currently in the code, and what we think there may be some perhaps opportunities for this board to develop standards potentially, as part of this work stream moving forward. And of course, the broader ecosystem as well that we've heard earlier that we have done some work on ISQM1, some analysis on ISQM1 and also the audit firm governance codes both in the UK and Japan as well. And of course, there's a recognition that as part of the broader ecosystem, there are other stakeholders involved. So perhaps if I could just go to the next slide, which is the key characteristics of an ethical firm, which Ken had alluded to earlier. And some of the board members have also talked about is not just to perhaps look at it from a negative light, but look at it from a very positive light of what would a firm look like when it has strong ethical culture? What does good look like for a firm? Because as we speak to, stakeholders and to firms, we get the sense that, firms do, want to do the right thing. They understand the importance of public interest. They understand that their brand is very much tied to public interest. And the public trust is really important in terms of the the continuing and long-term success of those firms as they grow in different kinds of businesses and services. So what the working group had done is this is an initial draft, I guess we put in the preliminary report of what you know, an ethical firm would look like, some of those key characteristics, irrespective of your jurisdiction, irrespective of the size of the firm or the types of services that a firm might provide. And if you look at it, if you had a chance to look at the report, you see that some of those elements, some of those points that we have been discussing just now have come up. You know, of course, we talked about the importance of leadership. You know, the ethical values on the left-hand side there at the bottom. The ethical values are embedded in every aspect of the firm's strategy and operation. So we talked about the importance of strategy. We talked about really the need to embed ethical values into the firm. Again, you know, the concept of open dialogue, questioning and challenging practices. And if you look at the top there, a commitment to reviewing its ethical policies to reflect that sort of evolving ethical challenges and professional standards. So we talked a little bit about that as well in terms of education, the importance of not just having you know, your standard training, but really delving into the heart of the issues about, you know, understanding how to make ethical decisions, I guess, in different types of environment. So like I said, this is what we've, the working group felt that it's important to really not just to look at perhaps the challenges of poor culture, but I think very much tied to this work is look at when you have the right culture, when you have strong ethical culture, strong ethical leadership, strong governance structures and framework, what would this firm look like? And we're hoping this will, you know, really encourage firms to really strive towards being an ethical firm, you know, as they are trying, you know. So that's one element of what the working group has looked at, is really tying to the public interest issues as well. And then I'm just gonna move through this fairly quickly, and then we'll give the board another chance to have any other additional feedbacks on some of these key topics. In terms of ethical culture, I think don't need to go say too much more. I think there's agreement certainly with all our stakeholders, and I'm sure around the table here, the importance of ethical culture in terms of creating the environment for ethical behavior. And I guess the point that I want to bring out here is that it is paramount for firms to really work hard in creating this ethical culture, to really work hard to create this environment where you know, their people can you know, really hold to a high standard of ethical behavior. So I guess the point the working group is wanting to make here is that it is important. If you're not if you don't know already, that it is important that firms and also this board focus on creating the ethical culture. I'll get there.
Next slide, please.
Nope, I got it. Next is the role of leadership. In the report that you'll probably find that we have put some of these key elements into two main buckets. One is leadership, and the other one, like I said earlier, is a broad sort of sense of what an ethical framework or structure would look like. And again, all the stakeholders we've spoken to, of course, agree of the importance of leadership as a key influencing factor on the culture of a firm or indeed any organization. And it's come through very clearly from the academic report from Dr. Eber as well. And of course, you know, we hear a lot about the tone at the top, but tone at the top is more than, of course, the messages, you know, that leaders or senior leaders might send out, but it's about leading by example. And I guess the other point is, as we look at some of these governance processes, selection processes, it's also important to look at how does a person get to the top? Do those who are acting ethically, do they actually have a fighting chance to get to the top? So these are some of the observations, some of the conversations we've had with our stakeholders as well. And I think we have embedded here I think more the concept of accountability, but as Laurie and others have pointed out early in this discussion, this is a really key point that we need to actually bring it out a little bit more, because without that accountability, it is very important. It's very difficult to know whether leaders are doing the right thing or not. So we really need to have that accountability process embedded in the firm's processes and governance structure. And as Laura have said, and the working group has also discussed, this is not just about the accountability of the most senior leaders, but accountability of everyone. Ties in with, I suppose, with Gabriella's earlier point about education as well. You don't just learn, and I think others have said that you don't just learn about ethics, at a senior point. You need to learn how to act ethically, build up your ethical muscles at an early stage, as you join the firm, and therefore learn about accountability also as you, join as a perhaps more junior staff. The next couple of slides really talk about just some of the key elements that the working group has identified in the reports based on the observations and based on the academic report and other research the working group had done. And we had already had some opportunity to discuss this, of course. So again, I think for each of these points, I will just bring up maybe one or two elements before we move further to other parts of the report. The first one is, of course, incentive and rewards, and we talked a little bit about this already. And of course, we've talked about the importance of making sure in the firm's performance management, it really built in that assessment of ethical performance, how they uphold ethical values is really important. I think another point perhaps we want to highlight to the board, and we kind of touched on this a little earlier from some of the comments from the board, is the importance of also the disincentive structures. So when something goes wrong, well, what are the penalties? What are the negative consequences that everyone can see? When senior leaders perhaps have ethical failures, they have a significant implication for the firm. What does the firm see? What process do they have? What disincentive structures do they have? So there's an element of that we need to, include in this sort of topic of incentives and rewards as well. Another point that we want to bring up in terms of culture and of consultation and challenge, I think, I think we've actually covered that quite well, but I would again reinforce the working group's views that, of course, the speak up culture form a very significant part of this broader culture of consultation and challenge, and that there needs to be a culture, as others have already mentioned, that employees feel comfortable in raising concerns, and within that, of course, is any sort of whistleblower mechanism. But as we've mentioned, stakeholders really feel very strongly, even when we talk to staff from the UK FRC, they really see this beyond just a speak up culture about ethics issues necessarily, but it's helpful to have this sort of broader culture of consultation and challenge. Environment where staff can speak their mind, be curious and really constructively challenge the views of their colleagues and supervisors, and works well with what we have already in our code under the code, the role and mindset provisions about having that critical mindset, having that inquisitive mindset, and you should be allowed to ask questions and have that sort of consultation and challenge culture. Education and training, I think we've heard a few comments already, so I won't go any further, and some of those points are picked up in the report as well, except perhaps a highlight the education, training, continuous education and training it's becoming more important also from the fact that, as firm grows their non-audit services, there are also lots of, as we've heard, professionals coming in who are not professional accountants. And whilst they have their own maybe code of conduct and code of ethics to follow, it is important that they understand some of these key ethical challenges that are perhaps more unique to the accounting profession, things like independence or objectivity. So it's important that that the training covers everybody. Perhaps I'll go to the next slide now, and there's just two other aspects I want to cover on the governance framework side. First one, of course, is transparency about the firm's ethical performance. The working group really sees that, and as this board does, transparency is a key element in promoting accountability and ensuring accountability of individuals and of the firm. So as you would appreciate, as we go through and develop every standard, we always think about the topic of transparency, because you can't just have the standards without helping the firm to have some mechanism to ensure there's accountability. So transparency really goes hand in hand with accountability. And this is, as you know, that some jurisdictions already required transparency reports. And the UK FRC in their code, they also require transparency reporting on performance, on ethical performances as well. And some firms in different jurisdictions also voluntarily provide the transparency reports. But this is what we're saying is you need to have transparency about your performance in terms of how are you going in terms of adhering to ethical standards. Can we still trust you in that sense? So that's really important that the working group feels that in terms of that type of transparency. But the working group also feels that it's more than just what's in the report about giving you how you rate yourself. But it's also transparent in a sense of open discussions with regulators. I think that's a really important point. And not just to see them as your mortal enemies, but have an opportunity to really talk to regulators about some of the challenges and how to approach them. And as with the next topic, on independent input, making that information available to your independent non-executives or independent third persons coming in and talk to them about some of the challenges, hear from them. Some of their perspective. And so you need to make information available to them, be transparent to them, because the more transparent you are, the more likely you're able to actually properly address ethical issues. So that takes me to the next point that we haven't, the board haven't really given us much input in the early discussion yet. So, and this is on the provision of independent input. For the sake of simplicity, I'll just say INEs or independent non-executives. Of course, it doesn't have to be that. But essentially, it's about having that independent voice or advice within the governance structure. And these INEs would come in with a variety of experience, background, and they're not all professional accountants. Some of them might have started out, many of them, as we were speaking to JFSA a few weeks ago, in fact, a large portion of the INEs, or they call it independent third persons, are basically executives in organizations, so they're not part of any accounting firms. And their focus principally is focusing on the firm's responsibility on public interest, making sure that in their strategic decisions, they properly consider what does that mean in the public interest. For instance, if you have some big government contracts coming through in your consulting, well, what does it mean in public interest? So as Chana and both Carl have mentioned that we have spoken with some INEs in the UK, but also a global INE from the US as well. And they have given some very helpful input and understanding of the workings and how it all works within a firm environment. The INEs who we spoke with would say that they are able to give input to the main strategic decisions, including, for instance, appointments of senior staff. One INE was telling us that in the recent appointment of the managing director or CEO, the INEs were given opportunity on a short list of candidates, and they were given opportunity to interview them and give input to the selection team. They're also involved in other things like performance evaluation and compensation committees and so forth. INEs are generally given full access of information or whatever they need to consider the firm's responsibility to act in the public interest. They have opportunity to discuss with senior management about different issues from a public interest perspective. As we were speaking with a couple of the FRC staff, they also have sort of connections with the regulators as well. They have opportunity to talk to the FRC staff, and the FRC staff can kind of talk to them about what some of the key issues that perhaps public interest issues that you need to think about, and they can run things off the, with the FRC staff as well. A few other perhaps key points I want to draw to the board's attention about this sort of in provision of independent input or having INEs. It is important that you set the right level of independence. Not have to be independent enough, but if you be too stringent, there could be challenges in getting the right people on your to come in as INEs within your governance structure. I think another point that certainly from the working group's perspective is that these INEs they give independent advice as a third party, but they're not oversight. They don't have voting rights in that sense. They're not necessarily decision makers or the people deciding on strategy, but they do have a strong role to making sure the firms are acting in the interest of in public interest, and they understand perhaps what some of the issues are when they make these high-level decisions and important decisions from a public interest perspective. And in fact, one INE that we speak to, their firm, they were saying that their firm are now increasingly focusing, recognizing the importance of culture. So INEs are also perhaps coming in from that perspective as well. Another key point that we'll probably bring up a bit later in the recommendations is scalability is really important here, because when you have a small firm, you will not have necessarily the opportunity to have independent INEs that sit in some boards. So you need to be flexible, and certainly from the working group's perspective, when we are moving forward to thinking through this particular topic, we need to think about how best to cater for those bigger firms and also the smaller firms from the perspective of having that independent input and independent voice. So I'm gonna pause here. We've already heard some feedback from the board, so a lot of really helpful feedback, but certainly at this point, we perhaps welcome any other comments.
Sure. Thank you very much, Jeff. And I'm sure that we will have comments. David, please.
Thank you. Just a question, a couple of questions, and then perhaps some thoughts. On slide 11, where you've got your preliminary views and you've got that diagram, is that kind of your view as to how you see things today or how they should be? Just so I can.
No, so those are like the public interest considerations, but we'll be coming to our preliminary views later on.
Okay, the reason I'm asking, just to give you context, is because when I think about the IESBA code on that slide 11, where you've got it as a separate box, but maybe it's my slide 11. I don't know.
It's the hamburger.
That one, yeah.
Okay.
Where you've got the IESBA, I honestly almost see that as an underpinning for everything. So if you show it in a drawing, it kind of sits underneath everything and
Okay.
everything else then sits on top.
Yeah.
So just visually something to think about.
We'll work on the visual. I gotta say, I wasn't trying to create that multi-dimensional relationships in this diagram, but
Jeff, this is what happens when you're in business because you always think about optics of how people react.
yes, no, very good point. Thank you.
The other point I wanted to make is on slide 13, where you say your second bullet point, a complex system. Do you mean complex as in difficult or complicated, or do you mean complex as in integrated?
Is this the
It's on your
culture?
ethical culture, yeah, second bullet point there. A complex system that sends out messages.
Yeah, I think what we meant is that culture is more than just very straightforward what your process are, what you find in your policy documents. I think it's a lot of underlying assumptions. And therefore, you know, you've got the different elements that's working together to collectively determine, send out those signals and messages of what the culture really is.
So maybe I'd suggest think about a word like integrated or something, because complex to me means complicated.
Yeah.
And it
no,
almost means
makes
like
sense.
it's impossible to
Very
fix.
good. Thank you.
And then on the governance and framework, I have to be honest, when we were going through this, I was reflecting on what Gabriella said as you were talking on that second box, the importance of culturing, of consultation and challenge. It wasn't resonating with me either. I have to be honest, because consultation to me is when you kind of go to someone else. But what we're talking about here, I think, is you want a dialogue to be going on. So it's almost like an engagement. So maybe it's thinking through, rather than think about it as I go out and I get something as it's a separate thing, how do we create an engagement model? And I'll give you an analogy from business that happened very often for me over my career, is when we would structure customer contracts to go out and bid. Part of the assessment I did was the accounting implications to that. And we would have a conversation about the structure and then thinking about, okay, just because we can, is this the right way to do it? So there was very much an upfront engagement with that whole team. So I don't know if that helps, but I was thinking about more here engagement, and whether you call it safety or you call it support, it's about that reinforcing, you know, that environment where it feels okay to talk. Because I've also seen in my career, most people that don't talk up is because they're scared.
Yes.
So it's how do you create that environment where people don't feel scared, and hence are okay with bringing it up. So I don't know if that helps.
That's
but
helpful.
just
Yeah, no,
thoughts around.
absolutely. That's a
Okay.
good way to
Thanks,
frame
David.
it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Rich, I'm sorry, I know that there are others who were earlier, but since Rich is a
Yeah.
member of the group, I think that he may want to react.
Yeah, David, I agree with your point. I think we really, and we've talked about this with some stakeholders. It's all, you could almost say it's an environment where there's a curiosity that leads to constant learning, that the very youngest people can say, why is this way? Why are we doing this way? What's the answer here? So that it's not, it doesn't always have to be about ethics, but when you create an environment where asking questions is not only okay, but it's encouraged because we learn and get better faster from that. That maybe is more what I've thought of when we thought about culture of consultation. And yes, that then plays out at some points where it's a more formal, I need to get the approval or sign off, or I need to get the advice of an expert in an area, for example, generic expert. But I think you're right. We are not just thinking about, okay, you have a technical matter. You got to come in and talk on those technical matters. You know, it's more about the environment from the lowest levels all the way up, from my perspective. But your comment helps direct us in that way. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Rich. I totally agree. And I would just then bounce off of what Rich said, is back to a comment that was made earlier about the difference between PAs and non-PAs. The mindset that Rich is talking about is exactly why we should be hopeful that non-PAs are going to be at exactly the same ability as PAs. It's just a training situation.
Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Thank you, David. Luigi.
Thank you. Uh, And thank you for this comprehensive presentation and for the report, which is really very interesting. I noted that say, the risk of going into a framework is that the framework can end to be the final stage of implementing the framework itself to respond to this matter. While I think that the framework should be a live animal that evolve with the situation. And basically, while I also understood that you are proposing, probably in the next slide, a monitoring process or procedures and so on, I think that one of the issues that we have is that in order to avoid that this is just an administrative stuff of exercise by setting everything is needed to have a framework, but it is, let's say, it is not aligned with the life and the business of an organization. I think that we need to have someone accountable to reassess on a continuous basis what is the measure of the success of this framework, basically. So is it really driving the ethical culture? It is really changing something in the organization? Is it really effective? Or it is just, let's say, something which is fixed and not able to, let's say, direct behaviors well where it is needed. So in my view, I would focus also on how an organization measure the success of this framework, compare with the objectives. The objective is, of course, drive an ethical behavior of the organization, and how this should happen, how it should be conducted, which are the elements that are needed in order to continue to make this culture evolving and to measure how it is evolving. Because otherwise, I think that everything could be just an exercise that at the end could have a very small impact on the organization. I don't know whether I was clear in explaining my view, but I would probably reinforce the matter of monitoring or add an additional layer and have someone accountable for this type of activity.
Thanks, Louis.
Do you want to respond?
Yeah, I mean, I think we know of enough examples where if it's just on paper and nothing actually happens, it's not very effective. You can have slogans on the walls, nice PowerPoint presentations, but if the reality is different, then there's no point. I mean, with IESBA, we can only create the framework. We don't have a monitoring role, but then it will be up to other parties to see how the monitoring goes. And then maybe we need to have post-implementation reviews and things like that to see how effective it has been. And to Jeff's point on scalability, I mean, the UK code applies if you do more than 20 PI audits. And in Japan, it's like if you have one listed entity, also you are in. So that's where, in Japan, a lot more ones have to comply with the audit firm governance code. So we need to have a balanced approach whenever we come to that part, so that it's scalable across many entities.
Yeah, if I could also add, when we were talking to the FRC staff and other stakeholders, measuring success of an ethical culture, it's a $1 million question. And it's really hard, but it's not to say that we shouldn't try because otherwise, and, we've heard things like, surveys, culture surveys, that seems to be, one of the things that seems to work with some reasonable success. So I think perhaps the working group can go back and look at how to focus on this aspect for the final report as well. But noting that, I think there's a general recognition is measuring culture. Understand what culture is hard enough. Measuring culture is perhaps equally, if not harder.
Andy, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, while we're still on this slide, just to leverage off what David said with regard to the engagement. I mean, a word that I respond well to is collaboration. And a lot of times the value of our profession is not what we know, it's who we know, and to integrate it all. But some of that does deal with the risks and rewards of someone called me, I better be the one to get the billable time. I don't want someone else to, but that's not, that's part of this culture issue. But I really want to talk about the hamburger slide again, slide 11.
The hamburger.
I'm sorry, I'm hungry. I look at that. And now maybe I've gotten everybody hungry. What I've been thinking of a lot, especially as we sit here, and I've done this many boards too, we sit around and we toil on these sentences and these words. And we all come up with our learned views as to what these words mean, but in terms of what this does in the world, what does this do in the world? In terms of, do the rank and file for 3 million professional accountants take these words and do something with it? I think this is maybe embodied in this and the other slides you have is, I think from metaphorically speaking, is there are intense rules on accounting and how accounting statements are and what auditing statements are. And then these big public documents get released with difficult financial accounting, hundreds of pages, lots of footnotes. But investors and other people who invest don't read through those financial statements, right? But they're the result of all those accounting standards because investment advisors or other services read them, digest them, and do something and move those along. So I've just always wondered as to what role firm leadership has to take the 500 pages of our ethical code and to translate that to the operation of the people working at their company. Is it that someone knows that paragraph 120, A1, paragraph B now says that you need to stand your ground? I mean, how does that get translated on the ground, on the base level? So having said that, I do want to also, when looking at the slide, mention when I see IESBA code, and I heard you mention role and mindset, and indeed your next section has a couple of call outs of specific sections, not by name, but by actually paragraph number and role and mindset, is that's a recently issued standard as well as our tax standard, which has at least the lessons of consider the reputational, commercial, and wider economic consequences, which certainly is a governance issue, and how this project, our project, fits into the post-implementation reviews on the role and mindset and maybe the tax, because that does seem to be some lessons too that we put out there. What have we learned? And then when I see different frameworks such as ISQM1 and an audit firm, I do want to make sure that to the extent that we can, that we do collaborate or coordinate with our IAASB folks so that we're all not at odds, but we're all pulling each other along as well. But this question of how does our multi-hundred page code, these words we deal with, and people can't answer the question. I'm not expecting professional accountants worldwide to be able to, as they're crossing the street, to be stopped and answer a question on what the code is. But yet I do expect them to have the essence of what it is to act with integrity, objectivity, professional confidence, understand their confidentiality requirements and professional behavior. How does the words we shape in the code get translated in the firm and the firm culture to actions? And anyway, the hamburger remind me of that, because the very left part of the slide said ethical firm, ethical culture, ethical leadership, and then next to it is our code. So is there analogy like the financial advisor when the investors don't really know what the IFRS did with regard to, contingent liabilities or consolidation. But yet someone has looked at it and given it to them in a way. So is that the role of firm leadership? Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. So, I mean, I think it sort of helped. I can't remember who made the comment whether the IESBA code should be across everything. At the large firm level, Andy, they take the code and they put it into their policies. So their global policies will reflect the IESBA code. I think sometimes because it's already in the policies, that's why sometimes IESBA doesn't get the prominence compared to the accounting standards. I mean, I have sometimes had like partners in large firms being on our task forces and suddenly realizing that it's not the Deloitte or the EY policy that said this, that it's the code that said this, and that it's, they suddenly realize that it's coming from somewhere else rather than their own policies.
And that's of course fine, they could take credit for it if they want, as long as the behavior is that. But I'm wondering how it gets translated necessarily from the words on our code to the words in a policy, because I do understand people put things in policies for firms, but then how do those firms not just put it in a policy, but get it out? Because it sounds like the folks there know about it. So that's the aspect that seems to be the part of the profession we're trying to touch, is how our words affect behavior and performance to increase the reliability and quality of the services professional accountants provide.
I might defer to Rich. Rich, you want to come in here?
Yeah, I mean, that is the essence of the challenge with any standards from wherever you are, is how do they get translated so that people bring them to mind in, as Andy, as you kind of said, not the detailed technical, but that they recognize that there's something there that has to be adhered to or is the right behavior, et cetera. And I think that's a little bit of I will say we've got we're not maybe as far along there yet as we're confirming some of the views here today and the steps, but that's going to be a bit of a challenge. And that has a lot to do with maybe not so much what might end up in the code, but what might end up in other materials that we put out to try to get that point across, because I do think that's a really that's some of the examples we've seen and you all have seen is not that people were completely ignorant of the rule, but the number of issues they were dealing with in a situation kind of aggregated, and they didn't bring the ethical thoughts to the table early, and they just kept going from the business or the technical issues or whatever, and all of a sudden there's a problem. And you could take almost any of the examples. A couple were mentioned here today. I think there's some things we've seen in recent enforcement actions that you realize that people just didn't think about it. It wasn't intentional, but they just didn't think about it. And I think that's the real challenge, is that someone said it earlier, how do you get in the education aspect? It's not about having a training course. It's about how do you get it to be top of mind or in their mind when they're going around day to day. I'm not sure, Andy, I totally addressed your comment, but I'll pause there.
Yeah, and I just to let the task force know, I really wasn't necessarily expecting you to answer the question. I just wanted to make sure you took that on board with regard to where we're going to end up, because it is a multi-million-dollar question.
It is. It is.
Thank you though for attempting.
Thank you very much, Andy. And Janine, you want to?
Yes, thank you. I was also thinking about a multi-million-dollar question in my head. This is the one. Yeah, because you can put so much in writing, but it needs to be a living thing. It needs to be regularly on the firm's board, leadership board's agenda when they meet, have meetings, and take it seriously. And it also has to do with the things around the safe learning environment that we talked about before, and how to create that, and that education and training is needed also on the, yeah, the behavioral side, not knowledge things, but the awareness, when the soft skills, awareness, creating awareness, when do you have, or do I have an ethical dilemma? And there, everyone has a lot of ethical dilemmas. It's in life, that it's part of life, but it's the awareness. And I wanted to say that I'm actually, when I lecture, as also one of my daily things that I do, I actually give ethical dilemma trainings to people that work at audit firms. So they're in their education system in the Netherlands. But what is most effective there is they're not getting this in their own firm, but with peers that work at different firms. So they get this, when I start with it's a small group, because it's very personal that you go into, because it has to do with who are yourself, what are your own personal values. We call it the concept me, we, work, world. In the end, it's how you contribute to also the culture in your workspace, and be effective in that way. But it's most effective is that when I started, I always think, oh, we have to do this, why? And then at the end, they say this was the most valuable what I've ever had in the whole training to become an auditor. And this is at the end, towards the end, before they can take the final exam. And but they learn most from each other, because then they hear that at other firms it's very different, or and then they, like, you see them like, oh, but I always thought it was like this. So I also wanted to say this just to trigger your thinking about it, and also on the living, how to get it a living thing. I also wanted to say, if you look at what ISQM1, it's a system. We talk here about a governance framework, not a system. So ISQM1, because there was also, of course, so long this audit quality issues, which are still there. But then you need to have a system that assigns ultimate responsibility, people that have roles in the system, even monitoring people. Yeah, you could also think about what has ISQM1 put in place. And we don't know the outcome yet because it's just recently implemented. But it's maybe something for the working group to also look at that, because it's more than only some principles. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Janine. And again, I think I was going to save my comments to the end, but I think that they should come when opportune. And I think that this discussion is bringing me again to a point. Thanks, Rich, for what you have said. Thanks, Janine, because I think that we are really getting into a direction which is very critical, which is this awareness, this ability to put ethics in practice. This is a real challenge for us as an ethics standard center, as we all know, and Chana put the finger on the sensitive topic, which is audit standards are an instrument to work. We are something that is not seen as such. And actually it should be, but it should be a lot of things before that. And this integration of ethics is fundamental. And I was thinking about something, listening to Rich. There is a philosopher, a political thinker that some of you might have known or read, Hannah Arendt, who spoke about, made a report about the Second World War. She fled Germany. She was German during the war. She was a Jew. And then she made an analysis about why all that happened. And her conclusion was that, yes, there were mean people wanting to do very mean things, but most of that happened because a lot of people were just joiners. They were just shallow. They were just clueless. They were not looking to what's happening in that way, and they were not necessarily wanting to do mean things, to be unethical. They were just joining, and this is many times what brings us to very awful situations, because there is someone planning the evil, and there are 100 just being shallow and joining and not making their playing their role in this. How we raise this awareness and this education within the firms, I think it's absolutely critical. But I think it's what you are doing. Again, education, training, and we have to think about it, but the instruments which drive this. And I'll say something about assessment and measure and measurement and etc., but not now. So this is a fascinating discussion. Laurie, I think we are getting late, but we need to listen to it.
Well, I will say something on assessment and measurement and pick up Luigi's point, Janine's, and maybe help feed what you're going to say. Really, this point about having a system and framework, you have to have that because there's a lot of things that need to be done. You need to put some structure around what those are, what the key levers are. But how to bring it to life. And for me, when I think about this, you can have all those things, you can check the box, but how you execute on them is what matters, right? All of them. So each of those pieces, it's very possible to measure those individual pieces in a wide variety of ways. I mean, especially when you're talking about firms like accounting or multidisciplinary firms, which include accountants who know how to do audits and have, many of them have internal audit departments of their own, being able to get in and say, is the helpline working? Are things being handled on a timely basis? Is accountability taking place? Not just check the box, everybody gets assigned a training course. Is there quote punishment? Is it proportional and reasonable in light of the wrong that was done? Is there tone from the top? How much of it is going on? Who is it coming from? Is it coming from leadership? I mean, there are a million things that could be measured. We won't talk about them all here, but it's very possible for that to be done and then feed into a continuous improvement program that drives the ethics strategy of the firm from the leadership. So I think just thinking about monitoring isn't just for monitoring's sake, it's for the continuous improvement and for fitting into the goals and plans of leadership, how to keep taking it up to the next level. Because whenever firms start to, and I think this is great, this work that's been done, and I think getting something out there that includes all this, we need to include the monitoring piece because it feeds into the continuous improvement and the responsibility of leadership to then drive strategic plans in that space to improve. And I think to the extent that that can take place, things will get better. I mean, it does make a difference and it does make a change, but you always need data and information to drive relevant improvement. Like, okay, we're good here, we're not so good here, let's focus on that. And keep that moving along. And this will be a lot for some firms to do, but it's very possible to do. They can do it.
Thank you very much, Laurie. Chana, how do you want to run this? Collect a few more comments?
Okay.
Or do you prefer to break and?
Maybe. Okay, let's
Yeah.
do it.
As to the point as possible,
Yeah.
so that we don't lose the inspiration.
Momentum.
I don't know which order was it, but Mark.
So I'll be very quick. Firstly, I know that the references in there about the importance of policies, actually the importance is outcomes. So we don't want just policies and procedures. We actually want to focus on the outcomes, and we should try and do that. Importance of the INEs is all the more important in the audit business model, because certainly in the UK context, they're LLPs. So management is also the owner. And therefore having that sort of grit in there is an important thing. And the other comment is we've begun to discuss already the sort of role of the code. I think it's really interesting that in jurisdictions where they have a governance code, it's not part of the code, it's something else. And we may want to also think about what the right vehicle is, because no doubt it sits absolutely central in terms of ethics. But how do we make that most valuable and most usable?
Thanks, Mark.
Here we go again. Sadia.
So I had similar comments, and maybe I have a story as well. We had a corporate that was giving out governance training, saying how our organization, not an audit firm, but how our organization is set up. And a few years later, they were subject to a corporate failure. So sometimes when you tick the boxes, on the outside, it might seem like you have the policies and procedures, but good governance is what is felt. And I thought that the key characteristics of ethical firm that the slide that comes one next, we should try and not put policies and procedures upfront. That should be something that happens afterwards, because we should keep it to a principal level, and policies and procedures should come after if necessary, or something to manage that. I think that we have to also think about how these firms are set up. And many conversations this week kind of made me question what I consider a firm in my jurisdiction. Is that a firm in another jurisdiction? And some of the conversations made me think, no, they're very different. And something that might be acceptable in my country wouldn't be acceptable in another country. So with that in mind, when we say leadership, who are we actually meaning? Because it will be important to understand who we're targeting. And then again, with the INEs, I read the UK FRC code, and I think it's been very direct, but I think that contextualizing who these individuals are and what they would be doing is very important, because it started leading me to ask, would they be subject to independence requirements, and what's the scope of their relationship? And we need to make sure that we don't complicate the code. I don't want to go into that there, but we should make sure that we're not giving them too much responsibility that now we need to manage independence requirements.
Thank you, Sadia.
Very quickly, just to add to what Dory said and Mark said, in terms of outcomes and measurement with the help of some indicators. So perhaps without complicating, taking out Sadia's point, can we build a matrix around which outcomes can be measured as a recommendation?
Thank you, Amarjit. Paul.
Maybe just to your point that, the assurance standards tell you how to do the work, but not always clear what are the ethics standards for it, but that how do we drive the clean messaging that this is about the reliability and usability of the work done. And especially because of all the work, all the stakeholder engagement that's been done through the governance work stream. How do we really convey that message that this is what the ask of the sector is? And this is really the internal governance structure that will allow you to respond effectively to that ask for really high quality, high integrity outputs from this sector, so that people can shift their minds. It's not us asking you, it's what is your user asking you to do, and how do you make sure you're able to do it effectively?
Thank you, Paul. Tomoyo, please.
Thank you, Chair. So some of the ethical behavior in the past, whichever industry it is tends to be a result of a group think. So people working along together have the same thinking, and everybody will feel that that is common sense, and then result in ethical behavior. So that is, I think, sometimes fresh eyes, external eyes are very helpful, and I think that is the intention of one of the purpose of INE. So independent, but also external, provide external view. So it doesn't necessarily to be the shape of INEs, but again, independent and external input is definitely, I think, important for this kind of culture and governance. And probably that consultation and challenges also for people with fresh eyes to provide a different view, so that we don't fall into the trap of groupthink. And probably I'm here to provide multi-stakeholder view here. So I think these are third party is very important, and thank you.
Thank you, Tomoyo. And finally, Ken.
Yes, it's a huge challenge between me and your well-deserved break. Just coming back to the issue of monitoring, which Luigi raised, and I totally agree with Luigi and others, and Janine and Nori who commented on this point. To my mind, monitoring should be an integral part of what we're trying to get at here and develop. Because in fact, your slide that you have on slide 12 on the screen is speaking to monitoring, because if you read the first two characteristics, as you call them, are at the top, a commitment to regularly review ethical policies reflect evolving ethical standards. To my mind, that's a part of monitoring in one respect. And the next one on the left, regular assessments and quality reviews to measure and sustain the firm's ethical culture, identify areas for improvement, etc. That's also a dimension of monitoring. So you already have monitoring built in, but clearly the framework itself, or that's what we call it, it should be a framework of principles. So principles should not vary from one year to the next. The code should focus on the principles, but how then the firms, as to Johnny's point in relation to SQM1, how firms design, implement, and operate their internal culture will need to reflect essentially their own sort of idiosyncrasies and their leaderships, etc. So that's going to vary from one firm to the next. But the monitoring is really important. But also in relation to this slide, I was trying to connect it to the other slide on slide 6, which spoke about essentially the key themes that the working group heard in its conversation stakeholders. And I was trying to map those key themes to the key characteristics that you have on this slide 12 here. And I found this slide 12 a lot harder to read than the earlier slide 6, because to my mind, slide 6 essentially delineated the perimeter of what we're looking at here in trying to identify all the relevant considerations or dimensions, as you call them, that really are relevant to this conversation about firm culture and governance. And if one were to start from there and then build underneath all that we would think would be necessary to really bring about this concept of an ethical firm. And maybe there are a number of those characteristics that can then be built into a number of those things. For example, the theme of incentives, rewards, etc. I couldn't find it on this slide. I mean, you speak a lot about policies and firm leadership, etc. But where is a characteristic that deals with how a firm would address issue of incentives, rewards, etc.? And to my mind, you would be missing a big piece if all you're saying in terms of an ethical firm is just what you have on this slide.
Jana, I think that you will leave your reactions for later, but
Yeah, so I think from what everyone has said, it's clear that we need some non-authoritative material because, which is one of the recommendations, because then we can address some things that might not neatly fit into the code. So that's one point. I mean, we will have a look at Ken's point, but I think it can fit in some of these areas. So maybe we have not sort of bought out that aspect. So we'll have a look at that, Ken. But thank you all for your comments. And we are late for the break.
well, all our discipline from the last 4 days went away.
Out the window.
We are 30 minutes late, so I think that we'll have to keep 20 minutes. Yeah, so we will come back at 11:50. I hope that everyone will be able to catch their flights with this discussion. And I think that we have here the response for the 4 or 5 days meeting in December. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I know that we are still missing a few people, but I think that we need to start Otherwise, we will all be here tomorrow. And Chana, please.
Thanks, Gabriela. So I think in the interest of time, I'm going to whiz past a few slides and sort of jump over a previous top signs we have and get to the end, and then we'll have a discussion. So we also thought it's important to sort of highlight what's in the current code. So it's not, there's nothing, there are a few things in the current code about the public interest commitment, the organizational culture, as Jeff was talking earlier about role and mindset. So there are some provisions in the code. It's very light, but nonetheless it's there. So the role of the code is, as you know, it's principles based. As I pointed out, the existing provisions are in different locations. And so there's a question, which is probably for the later stage of the project, whether it should be brought together in a consolidated, easy to navigate one section. And I think from the comments we have got, I think more guidance probably is needed on this topic. And this is just to, I think we have already covered IESQM1. And in certain jurisdictions, we have to be mindful that they have their own governance code, like the UK and Japan. So that's another challenge that we will have. But on the other side, it's only a couple of jurisdictions. It's not across every jurisdiction. So we'll have to think about how it can operate in that environment as well. And yesterday we got the P presentation from AICPA, and as it was agreed by the board yesterday evening, the recommendation was to get the EIOC to start looking at it. It's not that it will not form part of this in the end, but I think we'll get the EIOC to have a look at it first and collaborate with the EIOC and then see how it impacts our project later on, but not to sort of have the attention diverted too much into the PE space. So this is one of the things I'll just jump over. So the working group's recommendations, so we think it's important to address leadership and governance, and you will see the points on that slide. I think we have spoken about this previously. And it covers the leadership, the governance framework, INEs, the performance management, rewards and recognition, and education and training as well. So, so this is the, we feel that at the end, there will be a focus on leadership and governance in the governance framework. So you would have read in the report, there are two not mutually exclusive options. We are thinking about a standard setting project as well as non-authoritative material. And one of the things that an example of NAN that was quite useful in from IEESB around 2013 was its audit quality framework and what good looks like. And so that's what we are also thinking, like, what does good look like? And that's why we are recommending to the board the non-authoritative material part. And also the non-authoritative material can be done at a faster pace, like that. We partly deal with the burning platform issue, that we get out something that talks to the issues. And also the non-authoritative material, the development of that and starting on that journey could help the standard setting project. So that's why we are sort of saying that this could work well in a parallel sense. Because also the other thing is, with a standard setting project, the due process has to work. We have to come up with something. It has to go out for exposure. There's a period it will be out for comment. It has to come back. It has to be analyzed. So in a way, not to delay the standard setting project and first do the NAM and then we'll get to standard setting. We are sort of saying, let's do both together. And the other thing is, we have to speak to the same people. I mean, we met with some key senior people, as you would say in the Q3 one. And when we are meeting those people, it's better if we maximize their time to get the information we require. And you would see that we are also recommending global roundtables around March, April next year. So in a sense, we could use that opportunity to get information that will help both these projects move along. And so that's our rationale behind, like the sustainability example, where sustainability not only collected information for work stream 1 and 2, but for the experts as well. So you leverage that opportunity when you have the required people in the room. So in the standard setting project, there'll be development of provisions to address leadership and governance. And we put a couple of examples in the report just to give you a bit of a sense for what it is, a high level principle, and then some things to consider. And that will be the challenge as you get more into it, because given the breadth of the countries and the various development stages, we may only be able to create a high level principle and then things you could consider. And so we have more examples of those, but we thought we'll just put 2 for the moment. And if the board wants more, we can bring it in the final report stage. And as you say, it applies to all services provided by the firm. So this is on the non-authoritative material part. It's an opportunity to explain the importance of ethical culture. And it's like what I said about the audit quality framework. We can describe what good looks like. And also acknowledge that other stakeholders have a role to play in this as well. It's not only the firms, the regulators, the PAOs, those charged with governance. So everybody has a role to play in ultimately coming to a good position. So that's our thinking around that. Okay. I think we have got to the position where we stop and ask for feedback.
Thank you very much, Chana. Very effective. Amajid.
Talked about the code, provisions of the code. If you could get to that slide, please.
Very good. One more.
Let me help you. I'm going to you.
Yeah, so I read this piece in the report. There's a section 5, just about 2 pages, which talks about various provisions. So my suggestion was, can we make it, and here you've actually connected the issues with the relevant paras. So can we build this in the report as well?
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that you identified certain risks and how the code addresses those risks at present. If we can map that, maybe by way of a table or by way of description, and what are the gaps where the code is, provisions are missing. Some new elements have to be brought out. If that could be built into the report, I think that would be useful.
Yeah, no, that's a good suggestion, Amajit. We'll incorporate into the final report.
Okay, Luigi, please.
No, Andy.
Sorry.
Thanks for this. I certainly wholeheartedly support us moving forward. I would emphasize the non-authoritative material right now. And I did mention earlier, when we approved the strategic plan of this, I'm not sure I appreciated as much as it came out in the paper, the role of role and mindset in terms of already getting us some of the dots that are there. And so I mentioned, I don't know to what extent our post-implementation review of role and mindset is needed to inform our view as to additional standard setting, because I'm hopeful that role and mindset will make an impact. And then, as I mentioned too, I think, you know, in the tax the standard that's becoming effective, the PA needing to consider the commercial reputational wider economic consequences is, you know, specific for tax planning advice, but, you know, may have lessons if there are lessons to be learned. So I guess in thinking about what standard setting to do, and I'm not against standard setting, is I just want to know if we're fully integrated with as on this slide, a lot of this is from the role and mindset standard.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I mean, I don't know what the schedule is for the role and mindset post-implementation review. I mean, tax planning is supposed to start in July 2025. And I think post-implementation review of that will be a few years down the track.
So it's really role and mindset that
Yeah.
would be coming into the sweet spot of have we learned lessons in terms of is it making a difference? Is it being operationalized?
Yeah.
And if it's not, then what do we need to do different, or what are the gaps?
Yeah. Amajit?
Yeah, so one more point on the NAM, non-authoritative material.
Yeah.
So I note that there are 2 parts to the development of NAM. So one is on the, yes, so the first bullet explain the importance of ethical culture in driving ethical behavior within the firms. So, well, I hesitate to say this, but I guess you have enough material in this report to kind of finalize this section quickly,
Yeah.
if I can say.
Yeah.
So can it be a part of your final report in December itself? I hesitate, as I said, you know better your resources and how you're planning.
Yeah.
Part B, I'm good. Part B can wait for the final report. But
Yeah.
Part A, I thought you've done excellent groundwork, and perhaps you don't have many additional steps to my mind. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, another thing we suggested was that maybe in a similar way to how the board issued a statement in July last year, that at the time of issuing the final report, that a similar statement could be made in January 2025, And maybe we could incorporate um, some of the things that we already have in here in that statement. Why I hesitate is I think we can add a bit more to the NAM rather than finalizing it with what we have now.
So Chana, why I say that? Because your timeline is way out. It is 26 sometime, right? Towards the end of 26.
That is for the standard.
For the standards and NAM as well, right?
No.
NAM would come earlier?
Yeah, NAM will be finalized end of 25.
Oh, okay. So my point is,
Maybe September 25.
yeah.
We'll see how we
so
go.
Something which the market can use.
Gabriel is saying sooner.
You should come to that.
And secondly, which is again, I very much hesitate to say this. Do you really need two work streams? Because I guess one work stream, I mean, I don't have any strong views around it. You know better. You are deep into it. So my sense is one work stream, if you have two work streams, you will have issues of coordination. Whereas in one work stream, all these ideas feed into each other. So there's greater synergy in having one group doing all the work. Just a thought.
Yeah. Okay, I think maybe we'll take your comments on board for the planning committee, Gabriela.
And just one last point, maybe not the last. Can we, compress the timetable in some sense, even for standard setting? Because, things will change over next 2 years, and we should not become. I mean, there will be more new pieces coming up, and how do you factor in those kind of challenges? Sooner we finish, the better it is. I'm not saying do it tomorrow, but whatever compression can be done in the timelines.
Chana, I promise not to say anything, not even with my body language about this, about this proposal. I promise not to say it now. So, with respect to your comments on the NAM, Amajit, I think that, I believe that December will be too early to have enough worked on robust thing, but we might think about having, which is very close to what you already have here. I think it's more a matter of organizing things. Have an overview or a very high level framework about what this NAM could be. Not what it is, because it's too early, but what it could be in terms of the structure, the topics that you will address, something like that. But that's for the group to consider. It was just to somehow respond to Amajit's proposal. On the timings, I'm not going to say anything more now, and I'm going to give the floor to Rich, who wants to say something.
Yeah, and this isn't intended to address the timings, but as we call it, we've listed as NAM, but it doesn't necessarily have to be just a document. I think we've contemplated that there could be a series of messages and articles and maybe white papers. And I think that's an important element of what Chana referenced about, having some roundtables. You have a document you put together for that, but the board or the board issued a document in June of 23 that was brief but very on the point. And part of this timing issue for me is we can kind of keep this top of mind through thought leadership, white paper, NAM. I think that helps with the timing. And then the second thing I would comment on the roundtables, a number of stakeholders thought actually suggested those because they felt that we may even find more input, particularly around what's actionable activities and things like that. And so we took that on board and have thought about that in part of how why we're thinking about the roundtables. But the more we can get out there on this topic and that we're focused on it and people need to be aware of it, and we need to have ethical cultures that drive ethical behavior. I think the sooner and the more we can do that would be good. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm just going to add on to what Rich said. So since Gabriela, we came up with this concept of NAM and standard setting to dual option. And after you presented it at the PIOB in July, after that, we have been also presenting it to all the stakeholders that we met. I mean, it had some key stakeholders like Paul Manta from the US SEC, the Panos from the EU audit oversight. So, and even the even Accountancy Europe, and all of the stakeholders agreed about the approach and having both. And as Rich said, that they've also very interested in participating in potential roundtables in March, April next year.
Very good. We will have to find the right places to make all those people fit in maybe a stadium or because considering the level of interest. Okay, yeah, I very much agree with this approach as well. And I think that it was born back in June when we had the first good discussion around this topic. And I think that's really the way to go. I would not be surprised, but I think it's really early to understand what's going to happen in the future here at the board. It is even possible that from this NAM, or at this NAM that you will develop, or the documents, the articles, the thought leadership, whatever Rich was also mentioning, that we may come to the conclusion that one topic or two topics may need to be addressed as a standard setting project or consider or whatever. I think that we should not preclude any possibility now. What is clear now is that we can't do everything at the same time. There are priorities, there are urgencies, there are tasks which are more accomplishable in an appropriate time frame than others, and that we don't know everything despite this huge effort that this group has been making, the conversations that I have been having myself with so many people, some of them not intentionally, but because they want to speak about it. So I think that we should leave the door open, but this approach is very cautious. And at the same time has a high potential of effectiveness because we see that something will come out of this, which is concrete, which is helpful. So I'd like to congratulate the group for this journey and the way the place where you arrived. Back to you for anything, Ken.
Yes, and I was just reflecting on essentially the conversation just now and how the working group might wish to proceed in terms of a recommendation to the board in relation to NAM. And I suppose what I'm struggling a little bit in my mind is how far the board should go in committing to positions on a number of those issues in NAM when the project will still be underway and the board's thinking might not have crystallized as yet on a number of these issues or dimensions. And as Rich was speaking, I thought, well, perhaps it would be it would give the board greater flexibility to approach NAM through the avenue of perhaps less formal materials such as articles or even thought pieces that are essentially raising questions or highlighting relevant questions to be explored. Because if you were already to be thinking about developing a document like the audit quality framework that the IESBA has issued, that document is kind of a definitive, it's virtually the definitive word from audit quality and what audit quality is about, and if it's not just about the standards. So there's a, so what I suppose what I'm raising is a bit of a, is it a bit of a caution in what the board might wish to put out in terms of NAM that could be seen as authoritative when it's still working for the issues as part of the project. So not that I'm trying to get already give an answer, but I think there's perhaps a need to further think about what would make sense if those two extremes were to proceed in parallel. So that the whatever is going to get into the NAM does get ahead of where the board is going to land on a number of those issues or principles in terms of the project. So just a thought for the working group to consider.
Ken, if I may respond, I think when you look at the how we have staged it in the report, the NAM gets issued at the point that the standard is issued for ED. So that's why we staged it in that way, because we thought if we get to the ED stage, then you're sort of settle on what needs to be said, and then you're more comfortable with the NAM. So that's why we stage it in that way in the report. But we will take it back and think about it.
So,
If I could just quickly add to that, the other point, building on what Rich said and Ken said, if there are thought pieces, if I could use that expression, they're very useful for teeing up questions at round tables, and they can be quite specific and build a small portfolio of them that then helps the thought process and takes less time to do something on an individual topic. And as a thought piece, as a discussion document. And I think as a stepping stone, that's potentially a way of building the NAM as well, if you see what I'm getting at.
okay, so Chana, anything else on your side? Oh, Amajit, sorry.
It's not on timelines or the, how do you handle this? It's a very specific point of detail. So I found a couple of places we've mentioned about systemically important entities. So just a word of caution there, because it has very specific connotations in the financial sector space. So, typically FSB definition is if systemically important institutions are those where the size is very big, they're very complex, and there is interconnectedness. And then, with it comes a lot of prudential norms, capital adequacy. So I'll just put a word of caution in terms of using it. It may take us in a unwarranted directions.
Well, we can discuss this. Maybe I was influencing the group in that respect, because the first word used was systematically important, which I think it's not the right word. It was the word systemic.
Jeremy.
Was that Jeremy Hirsch used.
Yeah.
I'm aware of those different technical definitions, but I think that here we can take the concept broadly as institutions which the way they work, the may impact significantly the system. Yeah, or just make a footnote that we are not.
That's what.
We don't need.
That's what we have done. So systemic. Yeah. With the first time it's mentioned, I think we have referred to Jeremy Hirschon's talk he gave at the board in March, and which he later published on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So we have linked it to that. So what he means is when service providers gets large, as you say, and they are so interconnected, and the services they provide can only be provided by one of them. Like if you think about a global group audit or something like that, and when they fail, the impact it has. The classic example is Anderson when they collapsed. So that's what he means by that. But it has been footnoted. And
so, if there are No other comments. Janine, before I close this topic, do you want to, or before, maybe I'll close the topic and then I'll give you the floor to say whatever you may want to say about the board meeting, okay? Is that okay?
Yep.
Okay, so very quickly, one or two remaining things that I'd like to say about this. First on measurement of impact and assessment of impact. I think that I agree, but we need to be very careful because this is the kind of thing which if we were to do a lot in terms of measuring how much it is impacting the robustness of ethical culture and etc., we may create another problem. I'm very much afraid of creating KPIs and things like that in these areas because they may well drive a different problem in addition to this. Anyway, of course, I realize that we, as always, should not put the standards out and not do anything about it. There will be post-implementation reviews. The group can think about ways of regulators, for instance, measuring, or I hate the word for these things, but assessing the impact that this is making. But we have to be a little bit careful because it may drive us in the wrong direction. Secondly, on the report and taking into consideration what China mentioned at the start, and I suspect that it may help with others, that in Australia, the PJC, the Joint Committee, wants to make it part of their evidence. Of course, the report will be public and everybody can use it for free, and no fees. But I think that the group might have this in mind when drafting the final report because it should be very, very clean and straightforward. At least, I mean, we can put everything in there, but I think that the core of the report should be relatively short, clean and direct to the point with a very good half-page executive summary saying the problem is that, what we have found is this, what we are recommended is that, and address the good work that the group has done in terms of identification, results, etc., and probably put some information, which is very useful at this stage, about how you got here, with whom you spoke, and etc. Leave it for an appendix or something like that, because I suspect that many people with very different backgrounds and mental frameworks and etc. will want to see what we are doing, and they want to see it in 10 minutes and have an idea about what's happening there. What are these guys doing? So that was my other recommendation or suggestion that you take on board. Yeah, and I think these were my most important or remaining topics at this point. I think this was a fantastic conversation on the topic of firm culture and governance. Thank you for getting here alive and so lively. I think I think that the group will go back with a lot of inspiration and very good ideas and direction about the right approach to take when developing this work, and to come back in December with something which is very good. It's a fascinating topic. I think we could stay here for the rest of the day discussing this, but and which just shows the challenge of that this group has in hands, because everybody has ideas, everybody has different perspectives. This is an incredible amount of information and opinions, and distinguished opinions from facts and from direction is very difficult. So you really have a great challenge ahead, and we'll see what we decide in terms of how to bring the work forward. Amajit, I think it's not in discussion here, but yeah, one group, two groups, it has there are some halfway approaches that we may want to take, but it also depends on resources availability and these kind of things. So Janine, before I close the session, would you like to say something about this topic or about your first IESBA board meeting? How did you feel? What are your recommendations to this group? Anything that you want to say or
Okay.
nothing?
No, I like to say something. First of all, that it was really a privilege to be here the whole week. First time attending this meeting as a PIB board member. So no, a very good meeting, well led. A lot of diverse perspectives are brought to the table, which is particularly good to see from a public interest perspective with my PIOB hat on. because that was, of course, also intended by the reforms to have this diversity. And also good because you can have boards that put a lot of diverse views on the table, but you build on each other's comments, which is to reach some overarching way forward, or some to reach conclusions are not always reached, but that's also not needed. But good input for the working groups to continue with the very important work. So very good, and all in a good, fine, good spirits atmosphere is what I feel. It's also important. So yeah, and I also like to congratulate with the progress made. A lot of hard work went into preparing everything. Also the staff who supported everything for the papers, and of course we're not yet there, and it's a continuous. There's a lot of ask on ethical side. So you have a huge work plan also ahead of you, but more specifically towards December, which of course is a very important meeting for the sustainability work, and the external experts also important in that respect. And a lot of work needs to be done there too. Yeah, that's of course very heavy lifting for all of you. But I'm very encouraged also from what you have accomplished to date, and created more clarity. I say it again, supporting flowcharts to also further work on the clarity, the coordination with the IEESB, which is very important. And it's not always easy to work with from these two different perspectives with same definitions, but you aligned them and created also a lot of discussion here this week, operational control and so on. But I think you're in a good position, looking forward to the December meeting to meet the timelines that were set for the projects, which is also a public interest issue. But the clarity is really important topic for us, also with the view to the non-PAs. But you all are aware of that, so I don't need to repeat that. Yeah, what else can I say? Of course, not only the sustainability standards, but also the work done on the CIFS project, the agreed way forwards with that. It's also an important project. Also, of course, the last but not least, the firm culture and governance, which is, I think, really a foundational thing. It can be for underpinning the whole code, and what you actually, the outcome-oriented approach, if you are able to achieve that through the work, that will really make an impact. That's what I hope, at least. So I was very pleased with the way the discussions went and all your input, and also towards this outcome-oriented, a real living system and not just policies, procedures. Well done. And I also like to make some other more overall remarks, and maybe some things, food for thought, encouragements, take them as some advice or observations from my side, from this public interest perspective, and also referring to things that were set in the MG reforms. Well, standard setting is, of course, about finding the right balance. It's principle based between the principles or requirements that you put in place, with some prohibitions where needed, and what you put in application material. But there's also, of course, then, and that was also why I made earlier this comment, like, if you put all the requirements, only the requirements, what do you have? Is it sufficient? Does it cover everything you want to address? But it's also about the enforceability, the drafting, and these are aspects that you find in this public interest framework that was issued together with the reforms, where these qualitative characteristics are all included. And from more conceptually, actually, if you start with a project, and you have all kind of ongoing projects, but under this framework, it's very important to understand upfront which issues are we going to solve, why do we do this project, what are the relevant qualitative characteristics that should be addressed when we're working on this subject for revising parts in the code or adding new parts to the code. This is very important. And but also not only to realize that from the start of a project, but more so during all your board deliberations. Because for me as an observer, I think it's very interesting then, like how are decisions made on what should go in, what the drafting will be or the final end product in the code on a certain topic, and how the issue that you wanted to solve and the qualitative characteristics that were important play a role in there, and how, when you make what decision, and also the ED responses you get when you make the presentations. So many agree, so many don't, so many have some comments. But I also like to encourage you to maybe when you start talking about those, also look at who made the comments, where did they come from. It's not so to say what I sometimes say a numbers game, like so many comment letters, so many, and you will realize that because some come from the regulatory community, they only send in a few letters, but there's a whole process behind that before they all agree on what should go in that one letter, many jurisdictions. So it's very important to also recognize that and be aware before you start talking about these topics. Oh yeah, where do these comments, which kind of comments came from which constituency, stakeholder group? Investors are important also, and of course the profession as well. But it is good to have also that every time, in your during the board meetings, to be aware of that before you start discussing the best way forward for finalizing a standard. I think I said everything I wanted to say, and I think I end with further encouragement and and a lot of wishing you a lot of success with the coming months. I think I will observe the November call meeting, conference meeting. And then I'm very looking forward to the progress by then. And I'd like to thank you and wish you all the best. And see you then in November online. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Janine. And it would be really, really helpful because these things, as we know, have a story, and it would be important that having been here and attended all these conversations, it will be easier, I think, for you to understand what's going to happen in November. But of course, this is just a wish.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are getting to the final of this wonderful meeting. We still have a small, big administrative topic, which is the minutes of the June board meeting that were circulated. Thank you for some comments and to ask you for accommodating them. And I'd like to ask if you are now comfortable with the final version that has been circulated. Okay, so the minutes of the June board meeting are approved as well. Ken, I don't know if there are any administrative topics, except that there will be lunch.
Yes, lunch is available, and there are also two side meetings later this afternoon. The planning committee is meeting over lunch, and then the firm culture and governance will meet after that. So your work is not done, Shanna. You're not off the hook yet.
Okay, so the decision about the December board meeting length will be shared, right? I think that after this conversation today and everything that we have ahead, it might be difficult to have a 4 days meeting, but we'll see. We will assess that and convey the message as soon as possible. With respect to other topics that there will be a lot of things moving over the next few times, namely the topics that I referred yesterday on certification of the standards, on the process of reappointment or appointment, whatever it will be, of the chair after January 2025. My commitment to this board, as it always was, and I try to stick to it, even if I don't have much time to write to you. My commitment is a commitment of full transparency. And if anyone has doubts about anything, please don't let the silence make this become a problem. Call, write, do anything. And I'll be very happy to speak with all of you every time you have any kind of needs. This brings me to the very end of this meeting, which has been a fantastic meeting. And sometimes we say this meeting was fantastic because we achieved to approve 4 projects and I don't know how many things. It was not the case. And still, I think it was one of the best meetings we had, at least since I'm here, due to the quality of the discussions, the intensity of the discussions. What I feel to be, but correct me if I'm wrong, I think that the board members are arrived in a position where everyone is completely comfortable to share thoughts and concerns and etc. And I hope that this is the case because this is the objective. It only enriches the discussion and it puts us today, Friday 20, in a much robust position to advance than we were 5 days ago. I also want to thank dearly the staff for the, I don't know how to call it, amazing work done. Yeah. A special thanks to those, to the technical advisors who have been extremely helpful, and a special thanks to AICPA again for hosting us in this meeting, in this marvelous place. I think that we are always inspired by this place, and to Astrid and Diana for the seamless organization and run of this meeting, which was also fantastic. Finally, and before we close, of course, a big thank to all of you. ISA 5000 has been approved, and I'd like that this board would convey them our congratulations, all the best for them, and I think that this deserves also an applause from us. They don't listen, but what matters is the intentions. Okay, so thank you very much. Safe travels to all of you, and if not before, I'll see you on the screen on the 8th of November and in person in December. Some of you I will be meeting, some of you in some task force meetings and things like that, but we'll meet in December in New York. Thank you. Safe travels.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.